Hey guys, tonight we begin with something darker than your neighbour's mood during HOA meetings. The Salem Witch Trials. Not the sanitised version from your high school history book, not the Halloween costume version with pointy hats and broomsticks. I'm talking about the actual Salem Witch Trials. Paranoid Puritans, teenage accusers with main character syndrome, and a legal system that made a magic 8-ball look sophisticated. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world, probably at some ungodly hour. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. But first, let's ask ourselves some questions. Have you ever wondered what it was actually like to live in Salem in 1692? Could you survive being accused of witchcraft by a teenager having a bad day? What would you do if your neighbour reported you for making their butter churn wrong? How long would it take before someone noticed you hadn't been to church enough times? Would you confess to crimes you didn't commit just to stop the interrogation? Or would you maintain your innocence and risk the noose? Could you handle living in a town where everyone's watching everyone, where a bad dream could become a death sentence, and where the local government's idea of evidence was she looked at me funny? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in Salem, Massachusetts. The year is 1692. You own exactly one outfit, your neighbours hate you for reasons they haven't invented yet, and somewhere in town, a group of teenage girls is about to ruin everyone's lives. Welcome to Hell, Puritan Edition. Let's set the scene. Salem in 1692 isn't the charming New England village you're picturing with autumn leaves and pumpkin spice. It's a cold, miserable settlement on the edge of nowhere, where everyone's angry, everyone's exhausted, and everyone's convinced the devil is personally invested in their turnip harvest. The Puritans who run this place fled England to practice their religion freely, which apparently means making everyone else's life as joyless as humanly possible. No dancing, no laughing, no fun of any kind. Church 7 days a week, black clothing mandatory, and if you sneeze during sermon, congratulations, you just gave the devil an opening. The physical landscape doesn't help matters. Salem is divided into two parts. Salem Town, the more prosperous port area where merchants live and trade, and Salem Village, the rural farming community where most of our story takes place. Salem Village is basically the forgotten stepchild, stuck in the shadow of the wealthier town, resentful and perpetually broke. The soil isn't great, the weather is worse, and the constant threat of Native American attacks on the frontier keeps everyone on edge, looking over their shoulders, jumping at shadows. Your house, if you can call it that, is a wooden box with a thatched roof that leaks every time it rains, which is often. There's one room for your entire family. No privacy, no personal space, just you, your spouse, your 6 children, and possibly your elderly mother-in-law who never stops complaining about how things were better in the old country. The fire in the hearth smokes constantly because the chimney is poorly built, filling the room with a grey haze that makes your eyes water and your lungs burn. In winter, the cold seeps through every crack in the walls, and no matter how many blankets you pile on, you're never truly warm. It's like living inside a damp, freezing cave that occasionally catches fire. Food is a constant worry. You grow what you can on your small plot of land. Corn, beans, squash, maybe some turnips if you're lucky. But the growing season is short, the soil is stubborn, and one bad harvest means your family goes hungry. You eat the same bland boiled mush day after day, seasoned with nothing but salt and disappointment. Meat is a luxury reserved for special occasions, and by special occasions we mean someone important died and there's a funeral feast. Your teeth hurt from the coarse bread, your stomach hurts from the questionable water, and your soul hurts from the relentless grinding poverty that defines every waking moment. But physical hardship is only part of the problem. The real issue is the social environment, which is more toxic than a medieval latrine in August. Salem Village is a community of about 600 people, which means everyone knows everyone, and everyone knows everyone's business. There's no anonymity, no escape, no way to reinvent yourself. If you had a bad reputation 20 years ago, you still have it. If your grandfather owed someone money, you're still paying for it socially. Every interaction is layered with decades of grudges, slights, and unresolved conflicts. And the gossip. Oh, the gossip! It's the primary form of entertainment in a place where entertainment has been outlawed as sinful. People whisper about who didn't show up to church last Sunday, who looked a little too happy during the week, whose cow died mysteriously, whose child was born exactly 8 months after the wedding. Nothing is too small to be noticed, judged, and filed away for future reference. Your neighbour might smile at you in the street, then spend the evening telling everyone else that you've been acting strange lately, and maybe consorting with dark forces. The economic situation adds another layer of tension. Salem Village is in a constant state of conflict with Salem Town over taxes, land rights, and political representation. The village wants its own church, its own minister, its own identity separate from the town. But that requires money, which nobody has. So they're stuck in this limbo, resentful of the wealthier townfolk, suspicious of each other, and fighting over scraps. Some families, like the Putnams, are relatively prosperous landowners. Others, like the Porters, have business ties to Salem Town and are seen as traitors. These factional divisions run deep, turning neighbours into enemies and transforming every disagreement into a potential blood feud. Then there's the matter of the minister. Salem Village has had a terrible time keeping a minister. They've gone through several, each one leaving after disputes over salary, firewood, or just general unhappiness, with the congregation's constant bickering. In 1689, they finally settle on Samuel Parris, a failed merchant from Barbados who brings with him his wife, his daughter Betty, his niece Abigail, and an enslaved woman named Tituba. Parris is not a particularly warm or beloved figure. He's demanding. He preaches fire and brimstone sermons about the devil and sin, and he's constantly complaining that the village doesn't pay him enough or give him enough firewood. His arrival doesn't unite the community. It just gives them one more thing to fight about. And let's talk about the Puritan worldview, because it's essential to understanding how things go so catastrophically wrong. Puritans believe the world is locked in an eternal battle between God and Satan. Every moment of every day is a spiritual battlefield. The devil isn't some abstract concept. He's real, active, and personally interested in destroying their godly community. He can appear in physical form, he can possess people, and most importantly, he can recruit witches to do his bidding. Witches, in Puritan theology, are people who've made a pact with Satan, selling their souls in exchange for supernatural powers to harm their neighbours. This belief system means that when things go wrong, and in Salem Village things are always going wrong, there has to be an explanation beyond bad luck or natural causes. Crop failure? Probably witchcraft. Child dies? Witchcraft. Butter won't churn? You guessed it. Witchcraft. The Puritans don't believe in random chance or coincidence. Everything happens for a reason, and that reason is usually either God testing them or the devil attacking them. This creates a culture where people are constantly looking for enemies, both visible and invisible, and where any misfortune can be blamed on a malevolent supernatural force rather than, say, bad weather or their own poor farming techniques. Your daily routine is suffocating. You wake before dawn because sleeping past sunrise is lazy, and laziness is a sin. You attend morning prayers with your family, listening to your father or husband read from the Bible in a monotone voice while you try not to fall asleep standing up. Then it's off to work. Farming, spinning, weaving, chopping wood, hauling water, scrubbing floors. The work never ends. Even children as young as 4 or 5 are put to work. There's no concept of childhood as a time for play and imagination. You're either working or you're being prepared to work. Church services happen twice on Sunday and last for hours. You sit on hard wooden benches in an unheated building, listening to Reverend Parris deliver sermons about damnation, hellfire, and the ever-present danger of sin. He reminds you that you're probably going to hell, that most people are going to hell, and that even if you do everything right, you might still go to hell because God decided your fate before you were born. It's not exactly uplifting. You're not allowed to bring anything to entertain yourself. No books, no snacks, no fidgeting. You just sit there, cold and uncomfortable, marinating in guilt and religious terror. And this is the environment, this pressure cooker of poverty, paranoia, religious extremism, and social tension, into which the witch trials will explode. Salem Village in early 1692 is a community on the edge, held together by fear and rigid social control, just waiting for a spark. That spark is about to come in the form of a few teenage girls with too much time on their hands and a town full of adults ready to believe the absolute worst about their neighbours. Welcome to Salem, where suspicion is a virtue and everyone's just one accusation away from the gallows. Being a Puritan in Salem means living under a microscope made of judgment and suspicious glares. Your entire existence revolves around being good enough for God, which, spoiler alert, you never are. Every moment is a test. Every pleasure is a sin. Did you smile at breakfast? Probably the devil. Did you sleep past dawn? Definitely the devil. Did you have an impure thought about your neighbour's wife? Straight to hell, do not pass go. The Puritans believe in predestination, meaning God already knows if you're damned. But you still have to act perfect anyway, just in case he's watching and wants to change his mind. It's exhausting, paranoid, and creates a culture where everyone's looking for someone else to blame when things go wrong. Let's start with your daily schedule, which is essentially a marathon of joylessness. You wake up before sunrise because sleeping in suggests laziness, and laziness opens the door for Satan to waltz right into your soul. The first thing you do, before eating, before washing your face, before even fully opening your eyes, is pray. Family prayer, led by the father of the household, who reads from the Bible while everyone kneels on the cold wooden floor, trying not to think about how hungry they are or how much their knees hurt. This goes on for at least 30 minutes, sometimes an hour if your father is feeling particularly pious or suspects someone in the family has been slacking in their devotions. After prayers, you eat a joyless breakfast of cornmeal mush or bread, so hard it could double as a weapon. No pleasant conversation, no jokes, no complaining about the food. You eat in silence or while someone continues reading scripture, because even meals are opportunities to focus on God and contemplate your many, many failings as a human being. If you dare to express enjoyment of your food, if you make a sound that suggests pleasure, you'll get a sharp look from your father and possibly a lecture about gluttony being one of the 7 deadly sins. Then it's off to work. Men head to the fields or their trades, farming, carpentry, blacksmithing. Women stay home to cook, clean, spin wool, make clothing, care for children, tend the garden, preserve food, and generally work themselves into an early grave. Children help with whatever task matches their size and ability. There's no school for most kids in Salem Village, no time for play, no concept of childhood as a protected, innocent time of life. You're basically a small adult with fewer rights and more chores. But here's the thing that makes Puritan life truly suffocating. It's not enough to just do your work. You have to do it with the right attitude. You can't be resentful, can't complain, can't even look tired. Your labour is supposed to be an act of worship, a way of glorifying God through diligence and humility. If you're grumbling while churning butter or ploughing a field, that's a spiritual failing. If you take a break because your back is killing you, someone might suggest that you lack moral fibre. The Puritans have turned work into a religious obligation and rest into a form of rebellion. Speaking of rebellion, let's talk about what you're absolutely not allowed to do. Dancing, forbidden. It leads to lustful thoughts and physical pleasure, both of which are gateways to sin. Music, except for psalms sung in church, forbidden. Anything with a rhythm or melody that might make you feel joy is suspect. Theatre or acting, completely forbidden. It's pretending to be someone you're not, which is basically lying. And also it's fun, so obviously it's evil. Card games, dice, any form of gambling, forbidden. Even innocent games are seen as wastes of time that could be spent in prayer or labour. Christmas celebrations, believe it or not, forbidden. The Puritans think Christmas has become too commercialised and pagan. Yes, even in the 1600s, so they don't celebrate it. No decorations, no special meals, no gifts. December 25th is just another cold, miserable work day. Easter gets a similar treatment. The only holidays that matter are the Sabbath and official days of fasting or Thanksgiving declared by the government, and those are about as fun as they sound. Your clothing is another form of spiritual discipline. Black, grey, brown, dark blue. These are your options. Nothing bright, nothing decorative, nothing that might draw attention to yourself or suggest vanity. Women wear simple dresses with white collars and caps that cover their hair completely, because a woman's hair is apparently so seductive it must be hidden from public view at all times. Men wear breeches, plain shirts, and dark coats, If you wear anything remotely colourful or fashionable, your neighbours will talk, and not in a good way. They'll wonder if you're getting prideful, if you're trying to show off wealth you don't have, or worse, if you're trying to attract inappropriate attention. In Salem, blending in isn't just social courtesy, it's survival. And then there's the Sabbath, which in theory is supposed to be a day of rest, but in practice is just a different kind of exhausting. Saturday evening, you start preparing for Sunday. All cooking must be done in advance because working on the Sabbath is forbidden. You can't even light a fire or cook a meal. Everything is cold leftovers. Sunday morning you wake up early, dress in your best, meaning least worn out clothing, and walk to the meeting house no matter the weather. Snow, rain, brutal cold, doesn't matter. Missing church is a punishable offence and people keep track. Church services last for hours. Not 1 hour like modern services, but 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours of sitting on hard benches in an unheated building while Reverend Parris delivers sermons that are essentially theological horror stories. He'll spend an hour explaining in vivid detail what happens to sinners in hell, the fire, the torment, the weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then he'll move on to explain that most of you are probably going there because predestination means God already knows who's saved and who's damned, and statistically most people are damned. It's like attending a motivational seminar run by someone who hates you and wants you to know it. You're not allowed to fall asleep. There are actual church officials called tithing men who walk around with long poles, watching for anyone whose eyes are closing or whose head is nodding. If they catch you dozing, they'll prod you with the pole, sometimes the knobbed end, sometimes the feathered end, depending on whether they're feeling merciful. Children are watched especially closely because children are naturally sinful and need constant correction. If a child squirms, whispers, or shows any sign of normal childhood behaviour, they'll be disciplined later at home, possibly with a switch or a belt. After the morning service, there's a brief break where you're allowed to go home and eat your cold leftovers, but you're not supposed to do anything recreational. No visiting with friends unless it's to discuss religious matters. No walking for pleasure. No reading anything except the Bible or approved religious texts. Then it's back to church for the afternoon service. Another 3 or 4 hours of sin-focused preaching, psalm singing, and slowly losing feeling in your backside. By the time Sunday ends, you're physically exhausted and spiritually beaten down, which is kind of the point. The Puritans believe that comfort and happiness make you spiritually lazy. They think suffering keeps you focused on God and the afterlife, reminding you that this world is temporary and probably terrible, so you'd better focus on the next one. It's a worldview that turns everyday misery into a virtue, and everyday joy into a sin. And here's the psychological trap. Because the Puritans believe in predestination, you never know if you're one of the elect chosen for salvation. There are no guarantees, no way to earn your way into heaven through good works. God decided your fate before you were born. But, and this is the cruel part, you still have to act like you're saved. You have to live a perfect godly life, not because it will save you, but because failing to do so proves you were probably damned all along. It's a no-win situation that creates constant anxiety, self-examination, and fear. This theological framework means everyone is watching everyone else for signs of damnation. Are you attending church regularly? Are you prospering or struggling financially because wealth might be a sign of God's favour, or it might be a sign of greed? Are your children well-behaved or rebellious? Do you pray enough? Do you read the Bible daily? Do you seem too happy, which suggests worldliness, or too sad, which suggests despair and lack of faith? Every detail of your life is scrutinised, interpreted, and judged by your neighbours, who are desperately trying to figure out their own salvation status and comparing themselves to you. So when something goes wrong in this pressure cooker of religious anxiety, when crops fail, when children get sick, when conflicts arise, people need an explanation that fits their worldview. Random chance doesn't exist in Puritan theology. Everything happens for a reason, and that reason is either God testing the faithful or Satan attacking the community through his servants. This is why witchcraft accusations become so appealing. They provide a simple answer to complex problems. Someone among us has betrayed God and made a pact with the devil, and they're using supernatural powers to harm the community. Find the witch, eliminate the threat, and maybe God will stop punishing us. Welcome to Puritan life, where happiness is suspicious Suffering is noble, and everyone's one bad day away from accusing their neighbour of dancing with demons. In the winter of 1692, a group of young girls in Salem village start having fits. Betty Paris, age 9, and her cousin Abigail Williams, age 11, begin screaming, throwing things, contorting their bodies, and claiming invisible forces are attacking them. Modern doctors would probably diagnose boredom, ergot poisoning from mouldy rye, or just garden variety attention-seeking behaviour. But this is Puritan Salem, where the most logical explanation for anything weird is always witchcraft. Soon, other girls join in, Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, and suddenly you've got a whole crew of teenagers having synchronised freakouts, pointing fingers, and enjoying the first time in their lives that adults are actually listening to them. Let's back up and set the stage for how this all begins. It's January 1692, the dead of winter in Massachusetts, which means it's dark, cold, and there's absolutely nothing to do. The girls live in the household of Reverend Samuel Parris, the village minister, and like all Puritan children, they're expected to spend their days in prayer, chores, and silent contemplation of their inevitable moral failings. No books except the Bible, no games, no entertainment, just the endless crushing boredom of Puritan childhood, where fun goes to die. Betty Paris is the minister's daughter, a shy, anxious child who's probably internalised every terrifying sermon her father has ever preached. Abigail Williams is her cousin, an orphan living with the Paris family, slightly older and reportedly more outspoken. In the kitchen, there's Tituba, an enslaved woman originally from Barbados, who Reverend Parris brought with him when he moved to Salem. Tituba has the unfortunate distinction of being different. She's from the Caribbean, she has dark skin, she speaks with an accent, and she knows stories and folk practices from a culture the Puritans find exotic and therefore terrifying. According to later testimonies, the girls sometimes gathered in the Paris kitchen with Tituba during the winter months, possibly to escape the cold, possibly to hear stories, possibly to engage in some low-key fortune-telling experiments. There are accounts of them trying to divine their future husbands by dropping egg whites into water and interpreting the shapes, basically the 17th century equivalent of checking your horoscope. But in Puritan Salem, this counts as dabbling in the occult. Whether this actually happened or was exaggerated later to explain the girls' behaviour, we'll never know. But it provides a convenient narrative. The girls played with forbidden magic, and now they're paying the price. Sometime in mid-January, Betty and Abigail start acting strangely. They scream for no apparent reason. They throw objects across the room. They contort their bodies into impossible positions, crawling under furniture, flailing their limbs, making strange sounds. They claim they're being pinched, bitten, and pricked by invisible needles. They have seizures, or at least what look like seizures. They bark like dogs. They repeat phrases backwards. It's disturbing enough that Reverend Parris calls in the local doctor, William Griggs, who examines the girls and delivers a diagnosis that will doom dozens of people. He declares that their affliction is beyond natural causes and must be the work of the evil hand, which is 17th century medical terminology for witchcraft. Now, let's pause here and consider what might actually be going on. One theory is ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye grain in cold, damp conditions, and when consumed, it can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and bizarre behaviour. Salem had a cold, wet growing season the previous year, perfect conditions for ergot. This could explain the physical symptoms. Another theory is simple psychological stress and hysteria. These girls live in a repressive society where they have no power, no autonomy, and no outlet for normal childhood energy or emotions. Suddenly acting out and getting attention, sympathy even, might be unconsciously appealing. Or, and this is the darkest possibility, maybe some of them knew exactly what they were doing. Maybe they started faking symptoms, either as a prank or to get attention, and then found they couldn't stop once adults started taking it seriously. The more attention they got, the more they had to commit to the performance. And once other girls joined in, it became a social contagion. Each girl trying to prove her affliction was worse than the others. It's like the world's deadliest game of one-upmanship. Because here's what happens next. The affliction spreads. Ann Putnam Jr., age 12, starts having fits. Anne is the daughter of Thomas Putnam, one of the wealthiest and most influential men in Salem Village, and her symptoms quickly become more dramatic than the Paris girls. Then comes Mercy Lewis, age 17, a servant in the Putnam household who survived a Native American attack that killed her parents, so she's already traumatized before any of this starts. Then Mary Walcott, Elizabeth Hubbard, Susanna Sheldon and others join the chorus of afflicted girls. Suddenly, you've got 8 or 9 girls, ranging in age from 9 to 20, all exhibiting similar symptoms or claiming they're being tormented by invisible forces. And the adults, instead of thinking, maybe this is a psychological phenomenon or a medical condition we don't understand, immediately conclude that Satan has launched a coordinated attack on Salem Village using an army of witches. Because that's definitely the more logical explanation. The girls' behaviour becomes increasingly theatrical. During fits, they shriek, they choke, they claim invisible hands are strangling them. They fall to the ground and writhe. They stick out their tongues and roll their eyes back in their heads. They interrupt church services with screaming. They point at empty corners of rooms and cry out that they see spectres, ghosts or spirits of witches, tormenting them. And here's the kicker. Only they can see these spectres. No one else can. You just have to take their word for it that an invisible ghost is currently pinching them or trying to make them sign a book. And the adults, bless their paranoid hearts, believe every word. Why wouldn't they? The girls have no reason to lie, right? They're innocent children and young women, and the Puritans have been told their entire lives that Satan is real, active, and constantly trying to destroy godly communities. This is exactly what they've been warned about in sermons for years. The fits are proof that their worst fears are justified. Reverend Parris is particularly invested in believing the girls because his own daughter and niece are among the afflicted. If he admits they might be faking or that there's a natural explanation, he looks like either a bad parent or a gullible fool. So he doubles down, holding prayer vigils, calling in other ministers for consultations, and pressuring the girls to name their tormentors. Other parents follow suit, and the community, already tense and divided, finds itself united for the first time in years, united in fear and the desire to root out the evil in their midst. What's particularly insidious is how the girls' afflictions give them power in a society where they normally have none. As Puritan females, especially young ones, they're expected to be silent, obedient, and invisible. They have no say in family decisions, no control over their futures, no voice in the community. But now, suddenly, rooms full of adults hang on their every word. Magistrates take notes when they speak. Their accusations can destroy anyone, even people of high social standing. For girls who've never had power before, this must be intoxicating. Ann Putnam Jr., in particular, becomes one of the most prolific accusers. Over the course of the trial, she'll accuse 62 people of witchcraft. That's not a typo, 62. She's 12 years old, and she's single-handedly responsible for a significant portion of the accusations. Some historians believe her father, Thomas Putnam, coached her and used her as a weapon in his various property disputes and grudges against neighbours. Others think Anne was genuinely convinced she was being tormented, her mind breaking under the pressure of Puritan theology and her own psychological vulnerabilities. Either way, her testimony sends multiple people to their deaths. The other girls feed off each other's performances. If one girl claims she sees a spectre, another claims she sees it too, confirming the first girl's testimony. They develop a shared language of affliction, specific gestures, cries, and behaviours that mark them as victims of witchcraft. They learn what gets the biggest reactions from adults, and they escalate accordingly. It becomes a horrifying form of performance art, except the audience takes it literally and people die because of it. What's maddening is how obvious the social dynamics are in hindsight. These girls are friends, servants in the same households, neighbours who see each other regularly. They have time to coordinate their stories, consciously or unconsciously. They know which people in town are unpopular or vulnerable. When they're asked to name their tormentors, they don't name random strangers, they name people the community already dislikes or fears. They're giving the adults what the adults want to hear, confirmation that their enemies are in league with Satan. And once the accusations start, there's no stopping them. The girls have painted themselves into a corner. If they admit they were wrong, or that they exaggerated, they'll be punished severely. Probably whipped, possibly charged with lying in court, definitely shamed by the community. So they have to keep going, keep adding names, keep performing affliction, keep feeding the beast they've created. The witch hunt takes on a life of its own, and the girls are both its architects and its prisoners. By the spring of 1692, the fits have become a daily occurrence, a grotesque form of entertainment for a community starved for drama. People pack the meeting house to watch the afflicted girls scream and fall. It's theatre, it's spectacle, it's proof that they're living in important times, that their village matters enough for Satan to personally attack. The girls have become celebrities in a culture that normally forbids all forms of celebrity. They're special, chosen, marked by forces beyond the natural world, and all it cost was the lives of everyone they pointed at. When the girls are pressed to name their tormentors, they don't go after the town elite. They start with the vulnerable, Tituba, an enslaved Caribbean woman working in Reverend Parris's household, Sarah Good, a homeless beggar everyone already hated, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who hadn't been to church in over a year and had married her indentured servant, which was scandalous. These were easy targets, women with no power, no friends, and no way to defend themselves. Tituba, probably terrified of being beaten or killed, confesses under interrogation and spins elaborate tales of devil worship, flying, and signing Satan's book. Her confession, instead of ending things, confirms everyone's worst fears and opens the floodgates. Let's start with Sarah Good, because her story perfectly illustrates how Salem's witch hunt targeted society's most vulnerable members. Sarah is in her late 30s, but she looks much older. Poverty and hardship have aged her badly. She's homeless, wandering from house to house in Salem village with her 4-year-old daughter, begging for food and shelter. Her husband, William Good, is a labourer who can't support the family. They're so poor that Sarah sometimes sleeps in ditches or barns. And she's known for muttering to herself as she walks away from houses where people have refused to help her. Here's the thing about Sarah Good. Everyone already hates her. When she begs for food, and you turn her down, she mutters under her breath. Probably curses, definitely resentment. And then, because correlation always equals causation in Puritan logic, if your cow dies a week later, or your child gets sick, well, obviously it was Sarah Good's muttered curse that did it. She's been the village scapegoat for years, so when the afflicted girls need a name, Sarah Good is low-hanging fruit. She's already suspected, already disliked, already blamed for half the minor misfortunes in the village. Accusing her just makes it official. When Sarah is arrested and brought in for questioning on February 29th, 1692, she denies everything. She says she hasn't hurt the children, she hasn't signed any devil's book, she hasn't done anything wrong. But her denials don't matter, because the evidence against her is her reputation. People testify that years ago, after Sarah came begging and they refused her, something bad happened. A pig died, milk spoiled, a child had nightmares. Never mind that these are common occurrences in agricultural life, or that nightmares happen to all children. In the minds of Salem's citizens, Sarah Good has been cursing them for years, and now she's finally being held accountable. The magistrates ask her what she mutters when she walks away from people's houses. She says she's reciting psalms. They don't believe her. They ask her if she made a pact with Satan. She says no. They ask if she's ever seen the devil. She says no. But then, in a move that shows just how desperate and cornered she is, she adds that she's seen Sarah Osborne with the devil. Sarah Good, facing execution, tries to deflect blame onto another accused woman. It doesn't save her, but it does implicate someone else, which the court loves. Then there's Sarah Osborne, who's around 49 years old and bedridden with illness. Sarah Osborne's crime isn't poverty. She actually owns property. Her crime is being socially unacceptable. She married her indentured servant Alexander Osborne shortly after her first husband died, which scandalised the community. A woman of her social position marrying a servant. Absolutely outrageous. She's also involved in a legal dispute with the Putnam family over land from her first marriage, and the Putnams are one of the most powerful families in Salem village. Making enemies of the Putnams is never a good idea, and it's probably not coincidental that Ann Putnam Jr. is one of the girls accusing her. Sarah Osborne hasn't been to church in over a year because she's sick and bedridden. In Puritan Salem, not attending church is basically an admission that you don't care about your immortal soul, which makes you suspect automatically. When she's brought in for questioning, she's so ill she can barely sit upright. She denies the accusations. She says she's never hurt the children, never made a pact with Satan, never even seen the devil. But the girls in the courtroom start having fits the moment she appears, shrieking that her spectre is tormenting them right now, pinching them, choking them. The magistrates watch the girls writhe and scream, and they ask Sarah Osborne why she's tormenting these innocent children. She says she isn't. They ask her again. She says she isn't. The cycle repeats until it's clear that nothing she says will matter. And then there's Tituba, whose story is perhaps the most tragic and complex of all. Tituba is enslaved, owned by Reverend Parris, and she has absolutely no power or protection. She's a woman of colour in a community that's already suspicious of anyone different, and she's foreign from Barbados, which makes her doubly exotic and therefore doubly suspect. When the girls first started having fits, Tituba was reportedly asked to help identify the source by baking a witch cake, a folk remedy where you mix the afflicted person's urine with rye meal, bake it, and feed it to a dog. The theory was that this would reveal the witch. This was actually Tituba trying to help, using folk magic she knew from her Caribbean background. But of course, using folk magic makes her even more suspicious. When Tituba is arrested and interrogated, she initially denies everything, just like Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne. But unlike them, Tituba is enslaved, which means she can be physically beaten, tortured, and abused with no legal consequences. Reverend Parris, her owner, is desperate to deflect blame from his household and prove that his daughter and niece are innocent victims rather than manipulative liars. So there's enormous pressure on Tituba to confess and to provide the kind of sensational details that will satisfy the authorities, and confess she does. After being beaten and threatened, Tituba gives the authorities exactly what they want: a full, elaborate confession complete with every lurid detail a Puritan could imagine. She says yes, she's seen the devil. He appeared to her as a tall man dressed in black. He brought her a book and made her sign it with her blood. She says she saw Sarah Good's and Sarah Osborne's names in the book too, along with several others she couldn't read. She describes flying through the air with Sarah Good on a pole. She talks about a yellow bird that served the devil and about a hairy imp with a long nose. She says there are witches all over Salem, a whole network of them, meeting in secret and plotting against the godly community. Her confession is perfect, so perfect that it's almost certainly a combination of what she thinks her interrogators want to hear, details from stories she's told the girls, and her own cultural background mixed with Puritan demonology. It's survival storytelling. She's figured out that denying the charges gets you hanged, but confessing might keep you alive. And she's right. Tituba, despite being the first to confess, is never executed. She sits in jail for over a year until someone finally pays her prison fees, and she's sold to a new owner. Her confession saves her life, but it also condemns dozens of others because it confirms that witchcraft is real, active, and widespread in Salem. The magistrates listening to Tituba's confession are simultaneously horrified and validated. This is what they feared all along. Not just one or two isolated witches, but a conspiracy, an organised effort by Satan to destroy their community. Tituba mentions other names in the Devil's Book that she couldn't read. How many more witches are there? Who else is signed? The afflicted girls, watching Tituba confess and seeing how well it's received, learn an important lesson. Giving the authorities what they want leads to survival. Maintaining innocence leads to the gallows. What's particularly insidious about these first three accusations is how they establish a template. All three women are outsiders in some way. Poor, sick, foreign, socially unacceptable. They're people the community already suspected, already feared, already wanted gone. Accusing them doesn't threaten the social order, it reinforces it. It tells everyone that the witches are exactly who you'd expect them to be. The people on the margins, the ones who don't fit in, the ones who make you uncomfortable. But here's where things start to spiral out of control. Once Tituba confirms that there are multiple witches working together, the hunt intensifies. If there are more names in the Devil's Book, they need to be found. The afflicted girls, now seeing that their accusations are believed and acted upon, become bolder. The magistrates, convinced they're uncovering a massive satanic conspiracy, become more aggressive in their questioning, and the community, terrified that witches are everywhere, starts seeing evidence of witchcraft in every misfortune and disagreement. Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne and Tituba are sent to jail to await trial. Sarah Osborne will die in prison in May, her illness worsening in the cold, filthy conditions, so she never even makes it to execution. Sarah Good will be hanged in July, pregnant at the time of her execution, still maintaining her innocence, reportedly cursing the magistrates with her final words. Tituba will survive by being the only one smart or desperate enough to tell the authorities exactly what they wanted to hear. These three women, a beggar, an invalid, and an enslaved woman, are the first casualties of Salem's witch hunt. They're arrested not because there's any evidence against them, but because they're convenient, because they're vulnerable, because they're different. And their arrests send a clear message to everyone else in Salem. The witch hunt is real, it's happening, and nobody is safe. Well, almost nobody. The wealthy and well-connected will be safe for a while longer, but that won't last. Because once you teach a community that accusations require no evidence, and that being different is proof of guilt, eventually everyone becomes a target. And the girls, watching from the courtroom as three women are dragged away in chains based solely on their testimony, learn the most dangerous lesson of all. Their words have power, and that power has no limits. So what gets you accused in Salem? Basically existing. Did you argue with a neighbour? Witch. Did your neighbour's cow die after you walked past their barn? Witch. Are you a woman who owns property? Witch. Are you too poor? Witch. Are you too rich? Also witch. Did you not go to church enough? Witch. Did you go to church but look bored? Believe it or not, witch, the accusations follow a pattern. Women who don't fit the mould, people with enemies, anyone who's different or outspoken or owns something someone else wants. And once you're accused, good luck. The burden of proof is on you to prove you're not a witch, which is like proving you're not thinking about elephants right now. Let's start with the most common reason people get accused. You had an argument with someone, and then something bad happened to them. This is Salem's version of cause and effect, except the causes are completely random, and the effects are blamed on witchcraft. Here's how it works. Your neighbour asks to borrow your tools. You say no because last time he borrowed them, he returned them broken. He walks away angry. 2 weeks later, his horse goes lame. Obviously, you cursed his horse with your witchy powers because you were angry about the tool situation. Never mind that horses go lame all the time. Never mind that correlation isn't causation. Never mind that you've never practiced magic in your life. The timeline fits the narrative, so you're a witch. These post hoc accusations are everywhere in the Salem records. 7 years ago, Goody so-and-so and I had a disagreement about a property line, and ever since then, my crops have struggled. She looked at me angrily in church, and that night I had terrible dreams. After I refused to sell her my pig, my children started getting sick one by one. People are dredging up decades-old grievances and reframing them as evidence of long-term witchcraft campaigns. It's like if your ex from 10 years ago suddenly blamed you for every bad thing that's happened to them since the breakup, except instead of just being annoying, it gets you hanged. Another guaranteed way to get accused. Be a woman who doesn't need a man. Widows who inherit property are particularly suspect, especially if they're managing that property successfully without remarrying. In Puritan society, women aren't supposed to have independence or economic power. They're supposed to be under the authority of fathers, then husbands, then sons. A woman who owns land, makes her own decisions, and doesn't remarry is violating the natural order, and violation of the natural order is pretty much Satan's whole brand. So when a widow like Sarah Osborne or Martha Corey gets accused, it's partly because they represent a threat to patriarchal norms. They're living proof that women don't actually need men to survive, and that's dangerous thinking. Being too outspoken is another fast-track to accusation. If you're a woman who speaks her mind, who argues with men, who doesn't defer to male authority, you're basically painting a target on your back. Martha Corey is a perfect example. She's in her 70s, a full member of the church, well respected, until she makes the mistake of suggesting that maybe the afflicted girls aren't being entirely honest. She questions the whole witch hunt, and within days she's accused of being a witch herself. The message is clear. You can challenge anything except the witch hunt. Doubt the witch hunt, and you become part of it. Medical knowledge can also get you accused, especially if you're a woman. Midwives are particularly vulnerable because they deal with birth and death, both of which are unpredictable and often tragic in the 17th century. When a baby dies during childbirth or a mother dies from complications, it's easier to blame the midwife's witchcraft than to accept that medical knowledge is limited, and sometimes people just die. Several accused women in Salem and other witch hunts were midwives or healers. They knew herbal remedies, they understood the body, and that knowledge made them suspicious. After all, if you know how to heal, you probably also know how to harm, right? Never mind that they spent their lives helping people. One bad outcome, and suddenly decades of service are forgotten. Poverty is basically an automatic accusation multiplier. If you're poor and you beg, you're suspicious because when people refuse to help you, you might curse them. If you're poor and you don't beg, you're suspicious because how are you surviving? Probably through satanic assistance. Sarah Good is the poster child for this. She's homeless, she begs, she mutters to herself, and she's blamed for every minor misfortune in the village. Being poor means you have no social capital, no defenders, no one willing to vouch for your character. You're an easy target. But here's the twist. Being wealthy can also get you accused, especially if someone wants what you have. As the witch hunt progresses and the accusations move up the social ladder, several accusations are transparently motivated by greed. Accused person owns valuable land that borders yours? Convenient. If they're convicted, their property is forfeited and suddenly it might become available. Some historians have mapped out the property disputes underlying Salem's accusations, and surprise, many of the accused owned desirable land or were involved in inheritance disputes with their accusers' families. Having enemies is basically a death sentence. And in a small community like Salem Village, where everyone's been feuding with everyone else for decades, everybody has enemies. The Putnam family, for instance, had ongoing disputes with multiple families over land, church governance, and political power. Ann Putnam Jr. accuses a disproportionate number of people connected to her family's rivals. Her father, Thomas Putnam, almost certainly coached her, or at the very least encouraged her accusations against people he didn't like. It's medieval political warfare dressed up in religious language. Not attending church regularly is another red flag. The Puritans keep track of who shows up to services and who doesn't. If you miss too many Sundays, people start talking. Are you sick? Are you lazy? Or are you avoiding church because you're in league with Satan and can't stand to be in God's house? Sarah Osborne hadn't been to church in over a year due to illness, and it's specifically mentioned as evidence of her wickedness. Never mind that she was bedridden. Not being physically present at church means you're spiritually absent too. But even attending church doesn't guarantee safety. If you attend but seem distracted, if you fall asleep during the 3-hour sermons, if you forget the words to a psalm, if you can't recite the Lord's Prayer perfectly when questioned, all of these become evidence against you. There's a case where a woman is accused partly because she stumbled over a word in the Lord's Prayer during her interrogation. She was probably terrified and exhausted, but nope. Must be Satan preventing her from speaking holy words correctly. Having a bad reputation for any reason makes you vulnerable. Were you involved in a scandal 20 years ago? Are you known for having a sharp tongue? Did you have a child out of wedlock? Do you drink too much? Do people just generally find you unpleasant? All of this gets dragged out as evidence of your long-term relationship with evil. Bridget Bishop owned a tavern and wore red clothes, which by Puritan standards is practically the same as announcing you're Satan's party planner. She also had a sharp wit and didn't suffer fools gladly, which meant she'd made enemies over the years. When she's accused, all of her past behaviour, running a tavern, dressing colourfully, being confident, is reframed as evidence that she's been a witch all along. Here's another fun one. Being related to an accused witch. Once someone in your family is accused, suspicion spreads to everyone connected to them. Multiple families see several members accused in succession. The logic is that witchcraft runs in families, passed down like a cursed inheritance. So if your mother is accused, you're probably next. If your sister is accused, you'd better start practicing your courtroom denials. It creates a contagion effect where entire family trees get swept up. Even trying to defend an accused person can get you accused. If you speak up in court on behalf of someone charged with witchcraft, if you question the evidence, if you suggest that maybe the afflicted girls aren't being honest, you're immediately suspicious. Why would you defend a witch unless you're a witch yourself? This creates an atmosphere where everyone's afraid to speak up, even for friends or family members they know are innocent. Silence becomes survival. And then there are the accusations that are just straight up nonsense. Someone had a dream where they saw you at a witch meeting. That's evidence. Someone's child drew a picture that kind of looked like you, and then the child got sick. Evidence. Someone saw a cat near your house, and everyone knows witches have familiar spirits that take animal form. Evidence. The bar for proof is so low that it's basically subterranean. The afflicted girls develop a whole repertoire of symptoms they can deploy against anyone. They'll look at someone in the courtroom and immediately start choking, claiming that person's spectre is strangling them. They'll shriek that they see the accused person's spirit flying around the room with a yellow bird. They'll fall to the ground and convulse, and the magistrates eat it up every single time. There's no skepticism, no questioning whether maybe these teenage girls have figured out that they can destroy anyone they point at. The assumption is always that the girls are innocent victims and the accused is guilty. What's particularly insidious is that you can't prove your innocence. How do you prove you didn't sign Satan's book when the only evidence is someone's spectral testimony that they saw you do it in a vision? How do you prove your ghost didn't torment someone when they claim it happened while you were asleep in your bed? How do you prove you didn't curse someone's cow when the only evidence is that the cow died after you walked by? You can't. The system is designed to make innocence impossible to prove, and if you try to point out these logical problems, if you say, "Wait, this doesn't make sense," you're immediately labelled as questioning God's justice or defending witchcraft. The witch hunt has become self-sustaining. Doubt feeds it. Questions feed it. Even innocence feeds it. Because a witch would obviously deny being a witch, so denying it proves you're lying, which proves you're guilty. By the summer of 1692, the rules for avoiding accusation have become impossible to follow, because there aren't any rules. You can be too poor or too rich, too quiet or too loud, too pious or not pious enough. You can attend church or skip it. You can speak up or stay silent. None of it matters. If someone wants you gone, if someone needs a scapegoat, if you're simply in the wrong place at the wrong time when the afflicted girls need a new name to throw out, you're done. Welcome to Salem, where the game is rigged, the points don't matter, and everyone loses except the people doing the accusing. Salem's legal proceedings would make Judge Judy throw her gavel through a window. The main form of evidence is spectral testimony, meaning if someone says they saw your ghost tormenting them in a dream, that counts as proof. You don't even have to be physically present at the crime, your spirit apparently did it. Other evidence includes the devil's mark, any mole, birthmark or skin imperfection, failure to recite the Lord's Prayer perfectly, try doing that under pressure, and the touch test, where if an afflicted person stops convulsing when you touch them. It proves you're a witch because you called your evil spirits back into your body. It's circular logic at its absolute finest. Let's start with spectral evidence, because it's the cornerstone of the entire witch hunt and also the most completely insane. Spectral evidence is testimony that the accused person's spectre, their ghost, their spirit, their astral projection, whatever you want to call it, appeared to someone and tormented them. The afflicted girls claim they see these spectres constantly. Rebecca Nurse's spectre is in the corner right now pinching me. John Proctor's spectre flew through my window last night and tried to choke me. The accused person could have been miles away at the time, asleep in their own bed with witnesses, but it doesn't matter. Their ghost apparently has a mind of its own and goes around committing crimes without them. Here's the problem with spectral evidence that even some Puritan ministers eventually recognise. If the devil can take someone's shape without their permission, then how do you know the spectre you saw was actually that person's ghost, and not just Satan pretending to be them? It's like getting a text from someone's phone and assuming it's definitely them and not someone who stole their phone. But the Court of Oyer and Termina, the special court established to hear the witchcraft cases, decides that spectral evidence is admissible. If an afflicted person says they saw your spectre, that's good enough for the court. You're guilty until proven innocent, and proving you weren't astrally projecting while you slept is somewhat difficult. The beauty of spectral evidence from the accuser's perspective is that it's completely unfalsifiable. You can't disprove something that only exists in someone else's vision. If the afflicted girls say they saw your spectre at a witch meeting in the woods at midnight, and you have 10 witnesses who swear you were home in bed at that time, it doesn't matter. Your body was home. Your spirit was out causing trouble. It's the perfect crime, well, the perfect accusation, because there's no possible alibi. Then there's the devil's mark, which is any physical imperfection on your body that could theoretically be where Satan pricked you to seal your pact with him. The logic goes, when you sign Satan's book, he marks you as his own, like the world's worst tattoo artist. These marks are supposedly insensitive to pain and don't bleed when pricked. So the accused are stripped and examined for any moles, warts, birthmarks, scars, or unusual blemishes. Given that pretty much everyone in the 17th century has some form of skin imperfection, they're living in filth with no dermatological care. This means everyone has potential devil's marks. The examiners, usually a group of local women appointed by the court, search every inch of the accused person's body. It's humiliating, invasive, and unscientific. They find a mole on your back, devil's mark, small birthmark on your thigh, devil's mark, scar from that time you burned yourself cooking, could be a devil's mark. They literally poke these marks with pins to see if they're insensitive to pain. If you don't react because you're either tough, numb from terror, or the pin didn't actually hit a nerve cluster, that's proof it's supernatural. If you do react and cry out in pain, well, they'll just find another mark and try again. Some accused people don't have any obvious marks, which you'd think would exonerate them. But no, the examiners just look harder. They check inside mouths, between toes, in the most private areas. They're determined to find something because the court expects them to. And in some cases, they declare that marks have mysteriously disappeared, which obviously means the witch made them vanish through magic, which is somehow even more incriminating than having them in the first place. You literally cannot win. Next up, the Lord's Prayer test. This one seems straightforward. Can you recite the Lord's Prayer perfectly? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Every good Christian should know this by heart. The Puritans recite it constantly. So if you stumble over the words, mess up the order, or forget a phrase, that's evidence that Satan is preventing you from speaking holy words. Never mind that you're standing in a courtroom, accused of a capital crime, surrounded by hostile faces, absolutely terrified, and possibly haven't slept in days because you've been in jail. Nope. If you can't perform perfectly under pressure, you're probably a witch. Several accused people fail this test not because they're witches, but because they're human beings in extremely stressful situations. George Burroughs, a former minister, is accused partly because during his interrogation he supposedly can't recite the Lord's Prayer without making mistakes. George Burroughs is a minister. His entire job was leading prayers, but in the moment, under interrogation, he stumbles. The court sees this as definitive proof of his guilt. It's like failing a pop quiz and being sentenced to death for it. The touch test is another piece of evidence that makes absolutely no sense but is accepted as valid anyway. Here's how it works. An afflicted girl is writhing on the ground, claiming she's being tormented by your spectre. The magistrates order you to walk over and touch her. If she suddenly stops convulsing when you make physical contact, it proves you're a witch. The theory is that when you touch her, you're calling your evil spirits back into your body, thus ending her torment. But here's the thing. If she keeps convulsing after you touch her, that also proves you're a witch because your spirits are stubborn. It's heads they win, tails you lose. The touch test is performed repeatedly in Salem's courtroom, and it works every single time, which should be everyone's first clue that it's completely staged. The afflicted girls know the script. When the accused person touches them, they stop screaming and go still. The audience gasps. The magistrates nod knowingly. It's theatre, not evidence. But nobody questions it because everyone wants to believe that witches are real and that they're being exposed. Then there's the evidence of maleficium, which is basically something bad happened, therefore witchcraft. Your testimony that 30 years ago Goody Proctor looked at you funny and then your pig died. Evidence. Your claim that after you refused to lend your neighbour some sugar, your butter wouldn't churn properly for a week. Evidence. The fact that your children have been sickly ever since you had an argument with the accused. Evidence. Never mind that pigs die, butter sometimes doesn't cooperate, and children get sick all the time in a world with no modern medicine. If you can connect any misfortune, no matter how tenuous, to any interaction with the accused, the court will hear it. These maleficium testimonies are often dredged up from decades in the past. People are testifying about incidents from the 1660s and 1670s, reinterpreting their entire personal histories through the lens of witchcraft. Now that I think about it, every bad thing that's happened to me for the past 20 years can be traced back to that woman. It's confirmation bias on a massive scale, and the court encourages it. The court also accepts evidence of witches' teats, which are supposedly extra nipples or protrusions where witches nurse their familiar spirits, demonic animals like cats, birds, or mysterious imps. The same body search that looks for devil's marks also looks for these, and the bar for what counts is incredibly low. Any skin tag, any unusual bump, any anatomical variation becomes suspicious. And God help you if you own a cat or have birds around your property, because those animals are obviously your demonic servants. Confession evidence is another category, and this one's particularly twisted. If someone confesses to being a witch, their confession is accepted as absolute truth. But their confession also implicates everyone they name as fellow witches. So when Tituba confesses and says she saw other names in Satan's book, those names become suspects automatically. When other accused people confess to save their own lives and name accomplices, those people are immediately arrested. It creates a cascading effect where each confession generates multiple new accusations. The court also considers behavioural evidence from the courtroom itself. If you stand there calmly denying the charges, you're cold and unfeeling, obviously a witch. If you get emotional and cry, you're putting on a show to manipulate the court, obviously a witch. If you seem confused by the proceedings, you're being evasive, witch. If you speak confidently in your own defence, you're being prideful and argumentative, witch. There's no correct way to behave because every behaviour is interpreted as proof of guilt. Some of the accused try to use logic to defend themselves, which goes about as well as you'd expect. John Proctor points out that if the girls can see his spectre tormenting them, why can't anyone else in the courtroom see it? The magistrates have no good answer for this, but it doesn't matter. Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old church member known for her piety, argues that she's never hurt anyone in her life and has always served God faithfully. The court acknowledges her good reputation, then convicts her anyway because obviously a real witch would maintain a good reputation to avoid suspicion. What makes Salem's evidence standards so dangerous is that they eliminate any possibility of innocence. Every category of evidence is designed to confirm guilt, not test it. If you have a mole, guilty. If you don't have a mole but they find a tiny freckle, guilty. If you can recite the prayer perfectly, you memorized it to fool them, suspicious. If you can't, you're blocked by Satan, guilty. If the afflicted girls stop convulsing when you touch them, guilty. If they don't stop, also guilty. If bad things happen to people you knew years ago, guilty. If good things happen to you while others suffered, you're prospering through Satan's gifts, guilty. The circular logic is maddening. The court assumes witchcraft is real, so every piece of evidence is interpreted through that lens. They're not investigating whether witchcraft occurred, they're confirming what they already believe. It's like a murder trial where the detective has already decided you're guilty and is just looking for ways to prove it, no matter how absurd. Some ministers, including Increase Mather, eventually publish concerns about spectral evidence, arguing that it's too unreliable and that the devil could indeed impersonate innocent people. But these warnings come too late to save most of the accused. By the time the intellectual elite starts questioning the evidence standards, 20 people are already dead and dozens more are in jail. The tragedy of Salem's evidence is that it's not evidence at all. It's mass delusion codified into legal procedure, prejudice dressed up as jurisprudence, and fear masquerading as justice. The court isn't weighing facts, it's rubber-stamping accusations, and once you're accused, the mountain of nonsensical evidence piled against you is impossible to climb. You're not on trial, you're already convicted. The trial is just theatre to make it look official. If you're accused, you're brought before local magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, two men who believe their job is to extract confessions, not determine innocence. The interrogations are public spectacles held in the meeting house, packed with townspeople eager for drama. You're asked loaded questions. Why do you torment these children? When did you sign the devil's book? If you deny it, you're lying. If you confess, you're guilty. There's no winning. Meanwhile, the afflicted girls shriek, fall to the floor, and claim your spirit is attacking them right there in the courtroom. The magistrates eat it up. Your protests of innocence are taken as further proof of your guilt because obviously a real witch would deny it. Let's paint the scene. You're dragged from jail, filthy, exhausted, probably malnourished because jail food in 1692 is whatever mouldy bread your family can afford to bring you. You haven't slept properly in days, maybe weeks. You're terrified because you know that almost everyone who stands where you're about to stand ends up convicted. You're brought into the Salem Village meeting house, which is packed to capacity with your neighbours, people you've known your entire life, all staring at you with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and barely concealed excitement. This is the most entertainment they've had in months. At the front of the room sit magistrates John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, along with several assistants taking notes. Hathorne is the more aggressive of the two, a man who's absolutely convinced that Salem is under demonic siege and that his holy mission is to root out every single witch. He's not interested in your side of the story. He's already decided you're guilty. His questions aren't designed to uncover truth. They're designed to trap you, to make you contradict yourself, to force you into impossible positions where any answer condemns you. The interrogation begins, and immediately you realise that the rules of normal conversation don't apply. Hathorne doesn't ask, "Are you a witch?" He asks, "Why have you hurt these children?" The question assumes guilt. It's not, "Did you sign the devil's book?" but "When did you sign the devil's book?" You try to correct him, to say you haven't hurt anyone, but he talks over you, repeating the question louder. The assumption of guilt is baked into every syllable. And then there are the girls. The afflicted girls are seated in a special section where everyone can see them, and the moment you're brought in, they start performing. They scream. They convulse. They claim your spectre is choking them, pinching them, stabbing them with invisible pins right at this very moment. Ann Putnam Jr. falls to the floor, writhing. Mercy Lewis clutches her throat and makes gagging sounds. Mary Walcott points at you with a shaking hand and shrieks that your spirit has a yellow bird on your shoulder. The entire room gasps. You look at your shoulder. There's nothing there. You try to say there's nothing there, but the magistrates aren't interested in what you can or cannot see. The girls see it, and that's what matters. Hathorne turns to you. "Why do you send your spectre to torment these poor children? You say you don't. You've never sent any spectre anywhere. You don't even know how one would do that," he asks again, louder, angrier. "Why are you hurting them?" You insist you're not. He asks if you've made a compact with the devil. You say no. He asks what you were doing last Tuesday at midnight. You say you were asleep in bed. He asks if anyone can confirm that. Your spouse was asleep too, so no. You don't have an alibi for being unconscious in your own home. This is apparently suspicious. The magistrates use a technique that modern interrogators would recognise as leading questions and psychological pressure. They don't ask open-ended questions that might lead to exculpatory information. They ask questions that presume guilt and demand you explain yourself. It's like if a police officer pulled you over and instead of asking if you know why they stopped you, immediately demanded, "Why were you driving drunk?" when you haven't been drinking. You're suddenly defending yourself against an accusation that hasn't even been proven. One of the most insidious tactics is the use of the afflicted girls as a real-time lie detector test. Every time you answer a question, the magistrates watch the girls' reactions. If you deny an accusation and the girl starts screaming louder, that's taken as proof you're lying and that your denial is tormenting them further. If you make any sudden movement, if you shift your weight, adjust your clothing, clasp your hands, the girls mirror it, claiming you're using witchcraft to control their bodies. You move your hand, they move their hands and scream that you're forcing them to. It's a grotesque puppet show where you're accused of pulling strings you can't even see. Rebecca Nurse, the 71-year-old church member, has one of the most heartbreaking interrogations. She's nearly deaf and has trouble hearing the questions. When she doesn't respond immediately, Hathorne takes her silence as evasion. When she asks him to repeat himself, he takes it as stalling. She's confused by the proceedings, which is entirely reasonable because the whole thing is insane, but her confusion is interpreted as evidence of guilt. At one point she asks what she's supposed to have done, and Hathorne snaps at her that she knows perfectly well what she's done. She doesn't. None of the accused really know the specific charges until they're being interrogated. The interrogations often include requests for the accused to recite prayers or scripture. This is supposed to test whether Satan is preventing them from speaking holy words. But imagine trying to recite anything perfectly while you're standing in front of a hostile crowd, being screamed at by teenage girls and facing execution. Your mind goes blank. You stumble over words you've known since childhood. You mix up phrases. And each mistake is recorded as evidence against you. It's a memory test administered under the worst possible conditions, and failing it can kill you. Some accused people try to point out the logical absurdities of what's happening. John Proctor, a farmer in his 60s, asks why, if he's such a powerful witch, he hasn't just killed all the afflicted girls already, instead of supposedly spending months pinching them in their dreams. It's a good question. The magistrates have no answer. Martha Corey laughs at the absurdity of the charges against her, which the court interprets as evidence that she's mocking them and therefore must be guilty. You can't win through logic because logic isn't the operating system here. Fear is. The magistrates also bring in witnesses who testify to past grievances. Remember that argument you had 15 years ago with your neighbour about his fence encroaching on your property? He's here now, testifying that ever since that argument, his chickens have been laying fewer eggs. Never mind that chickens lay fewer eggs as they age, or that 15 years is a long time to hold a grudge over poultry. The court hears it as evidence of long-term maleficium, harmful magic directed at enemies. Sometimes these testimony sessions devolve into airing of completely unrelated dirty laundry. People testify about affairs, debts, family disputes, petty insults from decades ago. It's like a Puritan reality show where everyone's worst moments are dragged out and reframed as evidence of witchcraft. She called me lazy in 1678, and I've had back problems ever since. Sure, Jan. That's definitely witchcraft and not the natural result of aging and manual labour. One particularly cruel tactic is the confrontation between accused and accusers. The magistrates will have the afflicted girl stand right in front of you, sometimes inches from your face, while they perform their fits. They'll claim your spectre is stabbing them, and they'll show wounds, red marks on their skin that they claim appeared supernaturally. Sometimes these marks are self-inflicted scratches they made when no one was looking. Sometimes they're just red patches from rubbing or pinching their own skin. But the court accepts them as genuine supernatural injuries. The magistrates occasionally try the good cop, bad cop routine, though usually it's more like bad cop, slightly less bad cop. Hathorne will berate you for 20 minutes, calling you a liar and a servant of Satan, and then Corin will lean in with a gentler voice and suggest that if you just confess, things will go easier for you. They promise that confession will save your life, and technically they're right. The people who confess don't get executed, but they spend months or years in jail and they have to live with the knowledge that they've confessed to something they didn't do and implicated innocent people to save themselves. The pressure to confess is enormous. You're sleep-deprived, malnourished, scared, and surrounded by hostile faces. The magistrates are telling you that confession is your only hope. The afflicted girls are screaming. Your neighbours are testifying against you. The minister is in the corner praying loudly for God to expose Satan's servants. Under that kind of pressure, false confessions happen. People will admit to anything just to make it stop. Some accused people are interrogated multiple times, brought back again and again as new evidence emerges, or as the magistrates hope that repeated pressure will break them. Each interrogation is a public event, with crowds gathering to watch like it's dinner theatre, except instead of dinner, it's someone's life being destroyed in real time. Spectators are allowed to shout comments, offer their own testimony, and generally turn the proceedings into a mob scene. There's no defence attorney. The concept barely exists in 1692, and even if it did, no lawyer would be willing to represent an accused witch because defending a witch makes you suspicious of witchcraft yourself. You're on your own, facing trained magistrates, a hostile crowd, and accusers who've been coached in their testimony. It's the legal equivalent of being thrown into a cage with wolves while someone shouts, "Defend yourself!" If you remain calm and rational during your interrogation, that's evidence you're cold-hearted and unfeeling, classic witch behaviour. If you get emotional and cry, you're trying to manipulate the court with false tears, also witch behaviour. If you get angry at the accusations, you're showing your true evil nature. If you stay quiet, you're refusing to cooperate. Every reaction is wrong. Every word can be twisted. Every silence is incriminating. The written records of these interrogations, which survive to this day, are infuriating to read. You can see the magistrates leading witnesses, ignoring exculpatory evidence and dismissing alibis. You can see accused people desperately trying to defend themselves, only to have their words turned against them. You can see the logic pretzels the court ties itself into to maintain that everyone accused is guilty. One examination record shows an accused woman saying, "I am innocent and God will clear my innocence." Hathorne responds, "How can you know you are innocent when the afflicted accuse you?" She says, "An evil spirit may appear in my shape." This is actually a theologically sound point. If Satan can take anyone's shape, then appearance means nothing. But Hathorne dismisses it. Why would the devil appear in the shape of an innocent person? She has no good answer because the question is circular. If the devil appears as you must have given him permission. If you gave him permission, you're not innocent. Therefore, you're guilty. QED. By the time your interrogation ends, you're exhausted, confused, and probably have said things that will be used against you at trial. The magistrates dismiss you back to jail, where you'll wait for the formal trial that's really just a formality. The interrogation was the trial. You've already been found guilty. The rest is just paperwork and scheduling your execution. Welcome to Puritan justice, where the questions are loaded, the evidence is nonsense, and your innocence was never really an option. One of the most absurd pieces of evidence is the touch test. If an afflicted girl is writhing on the ground, claiming you're tormenting her, the magistrates will have you walk over and touch her. If she stops convulsing, it means you've called your evil spirits back into your body, thus proving you're a witch. If she keeps convulsing, it means your spirits are stubborn, which also proves you're a witch. It's a perfect system with no possible way to win, kind of like trying to argue with your internet provider's customer service. Let's break down the theory behind this test, because calling it theory is generous. It's more like medieval fan fiction disguised as medical procedure. The Puritans believe that when a witch sends their spectre to torment someone, there's an invisible spiritual connection between the witch and their victim. The spectre is an extension of the witch's will, projected out into the world to do harm. When the witch touches the victim physically, they supposedly recall that spectre back into their own body, breaking the connection and ending the torment. It's like spiritual tech support. Have you tried physically touching the person your ghost is strangling? The touch test becomes one of the most frequently used demonstrations in Salem's courtroom. Here's how it plays out. An afflicted girl, let's say Ann Putnam Jr., is standing in the courtroom when you're brought in. The moment she sees you, she starts her performance. She shrieks, falls to the floor, and writhes around like she's being attacked by invisible bees. She clutches her throat, claiming your spectre is choking her. She makes gagging sounds. Her eyes roll back. It's dramatic, it's disturbing, and everyone in the room is watching in horror. Magistrate Hathorne turns to you and demands to know why you're tormenting this poor child. You insist you're not doing anything. You're just standing there, probably confused and terrified. He doesn't believe you. He orders you to walk over to the girl and touch her. You comply because what else can you do? You walk across the room, acutely aware that everyone's eyes are on you, and you reach out to touch the convulsing girl's hand or arm. The instant your skin makes contact with hers, she goes completely still. The screaming stops. The convulsions end. She opens her eyes, takes a deep breath, and sits up, looking dazed but recovered. The room erupts in gasps and murmurs. Magistrate Hathorne looks at you with grim satisfaction. "There," he says. "You see? When she touched her, the affliction ceased. She has called her spirits back. This is proof of her witchcraft. And just like that, you're done. The touch test has proven your guilt. Never mind that the girl could have simply stopped acting the moment you touched her. Never mind that this happens every single time, and maybe that should make someone suspicious about whether it's genuine. Never mind that correlation doesn't equal causation, and that a theatrical teenager stopping her performance on cue isn't actually evidence of supernatural intervention. The magistrates accept it as definitive proof. But here's where it gets even more ridiculous. The test works both ways, and both ways prove guilt. Sometimes, when the accused touches the afflicted girl, she doesn't stop convulsing. She keeps screaming and writhing. In those cases, the magistrates declare that the witch's spirits are particularly stubborn and resistant to being recalled. Or they say the witch is deliberately continuing the torment even through physical contact to mock the court. Either way, you're guilty. If she stops, guilty. If she doesn't stop, also guilty. It's the legal equivalent of heads I win, tails you lose. The afflicted girls quickly learn that they have complete control over this test. They can stop or continue their fits based on how they want the demonstration to go, and their choice always points toward guilt. It's like giving someone the power to determine your fate by whether they decide to keep pretending to be hurt or not. And unsurprisingly, they always decide in ways that confirm witchcraft. Sometimes the magistrates order multiple touch tests in a single session, having the accused touch different afflicted girls in sequence. Touch her. Now touch that one. Now go back and touch the first one again. Each time the girls stop convulsing on cue, and each time it's recorded as additional evidence. It's less like a legal proceeding, and more like a circus act where you're the unwilling participant and the penalty for failing is death. What makes the touch test particularly cruel is that it puts the accused in physical contact with their accusers, often young girls who are terrified or performing or both. Imagine being forced to walk across a courtroom and touch the hand of someone who's actively trying to get you executed, while everyone watches. It's psychologically brutal. Some accused people are elderly or infirm and can barely walk across the room. They shuffle over, struggling with the physical act itself, while the girl they're approaching shrieks louder the closer they get, ramping up the drama for maximum effect. The test is also used outside the formal courtroom setting. Sometimes magistrates order it during preliminary examinations at the jail or during private interrogations. They'll bring an afflicted girl to the accused person's cell and have them perform the touch test there, away from the public spectacle but with the same guilty either way logic. It's a portable persecution tool that can be deployed anywhere, anytime. Some of the accused try to refuse to participate in the touch test. They argue that they shouldn't have to touch anyone, that it's degrading, that it proves nothing. Their refusal is immediately taken as evidence of guilt. Why won't you touch her if you have nothing to hide? Is it because you know it will expose you as a witch? The magistrates demand compliance, and guards physically force the accused to participate if necessary. You don't get to opt out of your own conviction. What's particularly insidious is how the touch test preys on the accused's natural human responses. If you touch the girl gently, trying to be compassionate, the magistrates might say you're trying to manipulate her or control her through witchcraft. If you touch her roughly or pull away quickly because you're uncomfortable, they say you're showing your evil nature. If your hand shakes, and of course it does, you're terrified, they interpret it as your spirit struggling against being recalled. Every physical manifestation of fear or stress is reframed as evidence of guilt. The touch test also gives the afflicted girls enormous power in the moment. They're literally making life or death decisions in real time based on whether they choose to stop performing, and they know it. There are accounts of girls smirking or exchanging glances with each other during these tests, subtle signs that they're aware this is theatre and they're the directors. But the magistrates either don't notice or don't care. They're too invested in the narrative that witches are everywhere and must be exposed. Interestingly, the touch test is sometimes used in reverse. If an accused person is having their own fit, because yes, sometimes the accused start exhibiting similar symptoms, possibly from stress, or possibly hoping that claiming affliction themselves will deflect suspicion, another accused witch might be ordered to touch them to see if it stops their convulsions. It's witches all the way down, apparently. Everyone's both victim and perpetrator in a supernatural game of tag that only the magistrates understand. The medical reasoning behind the touch test, such as it is, comes from European witch-hunting traditions that crossed the Atlantic with the colonists. Similar tests were used in witch trials in England, Scotland, and continental Europe. The logic was imported wholesale without anyone stopping to question whether it actually made sense. It's medieval pseudoscience dressed up as legal procedure, and it's accepted because it fits the existing belief system. If everyone believes witches are real and operate according to certain rules, then tests based on those rules seem reasonable, even if the rules themselves are nonsense. What's maddening is that the touch test is presented as objective evidence, as if it's a neutral scientific measurement rather than a completely manipulable performance. The magistrates record it in their official notes with the same seriousness as they'd record physical evidence or eyewitness testimony. The accused touched the afflicted girl and immediately her torment ceased. This was witnessed by all present. It reads like legitimate courtroom documentation, which gives it an air of authority and credibility it absolutely doesn't deserve. Some of the accused try to turn the logic against their accusers. If touching someone proves I'm a witch, then anyone could be accused of anything by this measure. Any of you could be tested the same way. It's a good point, but making good points in Salem's courtroom is a waste of breath. The magistrates aren't interested in consistency or logic. They're interested in convictions. The touch test also creates a feedback loop that reinforces the girls' behaviour. Every time they perform, they get immediate validation. The magistrates believe them. The crowd gasps in horror. The accused person is found guilty. They're the centre of attention, the heroes of the story, the brave victims who are helping expose Satan's servants. Why would they stop? The positive reinforcement is enormous, and in a culture where these girls normally have no voice and no power, this sudden importance must be addictive. There's a psychological component too, where the girls might have convinced themselves that what they're doing is real. After performing the same fits dozens of times, after being told repeatedly that they're victims of witchcraft, after watching people get executed based on their testimony, they might genuinely believe their own performance. The line between conscious deception and self-deception blurs. They're not just lying, they're inhabiting a role so completely that it becomes their reality. The touch test reaches its absurd peak when magistrates start testing everything. Touch her hand, touch her forehead, touch her arm, look at her, don't look at her, stand near her, move away. Each variation produces a reaction from the afflicted girls, and each reaction is interpreted as evidence. It's like a deranged game of Simon Says, where every instruction proves you're in league with Satan. By the summer of 1692, the touch test has been performed so many times that it's become routine. It's part of the standard examination procedure. Bring in the accused, have them touch the afflicted, record the result, add it to the pile of evidence. It's assembly line justice, efficient and deadly, with the pretense of medical legitimacy to make everyone feel like they're being scientific and rational, rather than participating in mass delusion. What the touch test really demonstrates isn't witchcraft. It's the power of suggestion, group psychology, and confirmation bias. The afflicted girls know what's expected of them. They've watched other girls perform the test. They know that stopping their convulsions when touched makes everyone believe the witchcraft theory. So they do it, consistently, every time. And the magistrates, desperate to believe they're uncovering a real conspiracy, accept it without question. The touch test is theatre masquerading as medicine, persecution dressed up as diagnosis, and circular logic weaponized into a courtroom procedure. It proves nothing except that teenage girls can act on cue, and that a room full of supposedly intelligent adults can be fooled by the simplest trick imaginable. But in Salem, 1692, it's enough to send person after person to the gallows, and that's the real horror. Not that the test exists, but that everyone believes it. Bridget Bishop is a tavern owner, a widow who's been married 3 times, and someone who wears bright red clothes to church, which in Puritan Salem is basically the same as showing up in a bikini. She's been accused of witchcraft before, and has a reputation for being outspoken and independent, 2 things Puritan society absolutely hates in women. On June 10th, 1692, Bridget becomes the first person executed during the trials. She's hanged on Gallows Hill while maintaining her innocence. Her death sets a precedent and emboldens the court to keep going. After all, if one witch can hang, why not more? Let's talk about why Bridget Bishop was doomed from the start. She's around 60 years old in 1692, which makes her elderly by colonial standards, but she hasn't spent those years being quietly pious and invisible, like Puritan women are supposed to. No, Bridget has lived loudly. She runs a tavern, technically her husband runs it, but everyone knows Bridget is the real force behind the operation. She serves alcohol, which the Puritans tolerate grudgingly, because everyone drinks beer instead of water, but they don't like people who seem to enjoy it. And Bridget's tavern has a reputation for being lively, which is Puritan code for sinful. Her clothing choices alone would make her suspicious in any Puritan community. But in Salem, They're practically an advertisement for witchcraft. Bridget wears a red bodice to church. Bright red, not the dark, modest colours Puritans prefer. Red is the colour of passion, of vanity, of worldly pleasure. It's flashy. It draws attention. In a culture where the goal is to blend into a sea of black and grey and disappear into collective godliness, Bridget stands out like a cardinal in a flock of crows. People remember her. People talk about her. And when the witch hunt starts, people remember all the times they talked about her. She's also been married 3 times, which raises eyebrows. Her first 2 husbands died, probably from normal causes like disease or accident, because this is the 1600s and people die constantly. But in the paranoid atmosphere of Salem, multiple dead husbands make you look suspicious. Did she kill them through witchcraft? Did she curse them? The fact that she remarried quickly each time, which was actually economically necessary for a woman with no other means of support, is reframed as evidence that she's a man-eater, possibly literally. Bridget has been accused of witchcraft before, back in the 1680s. The charges didn't stick then, but in Salem, accusations have a long memory. Once you're accused, you're never fully cleared in people's minds. You're always that woman who was accused of witchcraft that one time. So when the 1692 trials begin, and the afflicted girls start throwing out names, Bridget Bishop is already on the list of usual suspects. She's the town's designated weirdo, the woman who doesn't conform, the one everyone can point to and say, "Yeah, I always thought she was strange." The testimony against her during her examination and trial is a greatest hits collection of every petty grievance and superstitious fear her neighbours have harboured for years. One man testifies that 20 years ago, Bridget came to his house late at night. He doesn't explain why or provide context. And when he tried to make her leave, he felt a strange pressure on his chest and couldn't speak. Obviously witchcraft, not a panic attack or sleep paralysis, or the fact that he was probably half asleep when this happened. Another witness claims that Bridget appeared in his bedroom at night as a spectre, even though Bridget herself was presumably asleep in her own home. She allegedly sat on his chest, which is a common symptom of what we now know as sleep paralysis, a well-documented phenomenon where people wake up unable to move and sometimes hallucinate a presence in the room. But in 1692, it's definitely a witch sitting on you, not your brain misfiring during REM sleep. Several people testify about her tavern, claiming it was a place of unseemly behaviour. People played shuffleboard there, they drank, they laughed loudly. These are apparently crimes in Puritan Salem, or at least evidence of moral corruption. One witness says he saw strange lights in Bridget's house at night. She was probably just up late with a candle, maybe reading or working, but no, mysterious lights definitely mean witchcraft. The most damning testimony comes from labourers who claim they found poppets, small dolls with pins in them, hidden in the walls of Bridget's house during renovations. Poppets are associated with sympathetic magic, the idea being that you make a doll representing your enemy and stick pins in it to harm them. This seems like solid evidence until you realise that A. the timing is suspiciously convenient, B. these poppets were supposedly found years before the current trials but are only being mentioned now, and C. anyone doing renovations could have planted them. But the court accepts the testimony without question because it fits the narrative. Bridget's examination before the magistrates is typical of Salem's proceedings. She's guilty before she opens her mouth. When she's brought in, the afflicted girls immediately start shrieking. They fall to the ground, claiming her spectre is attacking them right now. Bridget looks around, confused, and says she's never seen these girls before in her life. That doesn't help her case. The magistrates ask why she's tormenting them. She says she isn't. They ask again, louder. She says again that she's innocent. Hathorne asks her how the girls would know to accuse her if she weren't a witch. She has no good answer to that circular logic. The touch test is performed multiple times. Each time Bridget touches one of the afflicted girls, the girl immediately stops convulsing. The court records this as definitive proof of her witchcraft. Bridget tries to defend herself, pointing out that she's a Christian woman who's never hurt anyone, but her protestations fall on deaf ears. The magistrates have already decided. The crowd has already decided. Her bright red clothes are sitting in evidence, a symbol of her refusal to conform. On June 2nd, 1692, Bridget is formally indicted by a grand jury. Her trial before the Court of Oyer and Terminer happens quickly. There's no lengthy legal process, no appeals, no defence attorney. She's tried, convicted, and sentenced to death within days. The verdict surprises no one. What's surprising is the speed. The court is clearly eager to start executing people, to prove that they're taking the witch threat seriously, and that justice is being done. Even some of the ministers express concern about executing Bridget so quickly. Not because they think she's innocent, but because they're not sure the evidence meets the legal standards, even by the low standards of 1692. A group of Boston ministers submit a letter urging caution, particularly around the use of spectral evidence. But Governor William Phips and the judges on the court are impatient. They want results. They want to show the community that witches can be caught and punished. So Bridget Bishop's execution proceeds as planned. On the morning of June 10th, 1692, Bridget is taken from Salem jail and transported to Gallows Hill, a rocky outcropping on the edge of town. There's no gentle way to describe what follows. Hanging in the 17th century isn't the quick neck snap you see in movies. It's slow strangulation. The condemned person is put in a cart, driven to the gallows, and made to stand on the cart with a noose around their neck. Then the cart is driven away, leaving them hanging. Death takes several minutes as they suffocate. Bridget maintains her innocence to the end. According to witnesses, she protests that she's done nothing wrong, that she's innocent before God and man, that this is murder. Her words don't move the crowd or the officials. They've already decided she's a witch, and witches deserve to die. When the cart pulls away and Bridget's body drops, the crowd watches in silence or maybe murmurs prayers. Some probably feel satisfied that justice has been done. Others might feel uneasy, a nagging sense that something's wrong with all this. But no one speaks up. Not yet. Bridget's body is cut down after she's pronounced dead and buried in a shallow, unmarked grave somewhere on Gallows Hill. There's no funeral, no marker, no acknowledgement of her humanity. Witches don't get proper burials. They're disposed of quickly and forgotten. Or at least that's the intention. Her estate is forfeited to the Crown, another convenient side effect of witch convictions. Her tavern, her property, everything she owned is seized. Her family is left with nothing, and the stigma of being related to an executed witch. What Bridget Bishop's execution does, more than anything, is prove that the Salem Witch Trials have teeth. For months, people have been arrested and jailed, but no one has actually died. Now the court has shown it's willing to follow through. The afflicted girls see that their accusations can kill people, and instead of making them more cautious, it seems to embolden them. The magistrates see that executions are possible and popular. No one rioted or protested when Bridget was hanged. And the accused see that innocence isn't a defence and that maintaining your innocence can get you killed. Bridget's death creates a template. She's a woman who didn't conform, who stood out, who had enemies, who'd been accused before. She's convicted on spectral evidence, the touch test, decades-old grievances and superstitious testimony, and she's executed quickly to send a message. This is what happens to witches in Salem. This is what happens to women who wear red to church, who run businesses, who've been married too many times, who live too loudly. After Bridget Bishop hangs, there's a brief pause. The court takes a few weeks to reconsider its procedures, to debate the use of spectral evidence, to consult with ministers. Some people hope that maybe Bridget's death will satisfy the witch hunt's bloodlust, and things will calm down. They're wrong. The pause doesn't last. By late June, the executions resume and they come faster. If they can hang Bridget Bishop, they can hang anyone, and hang people they do. Over the next 3 months, 19 more people will follow Bridget to Gallows Hill. Some will be friends, some will be respected church members, some will be elderly, some will be parents of young children. But they all have one thing in common. They've been accused. And in Salem, 1692, accusation equals guilt, and guilt equals death. Bridget Bishop didn't just die on June 10th. She opened the floodgates. Her execution proved that Salem's witch hunt wasn't theatre or symbolic justice. It was real, it was deadly, and it was just getting started. The court had tasted blood, and now it wanted more. Bridget's crime wasn't witchcraft. Her crime was being different, being memorable, being a woman who didn't apologise for taking up space. And for that, Puritan Salem killed her, then moved on to the next name on the list. Rebecca Nurse is 71 years old, deeply religious, respected in the community, and basically the last person anyone would expect to be a witch. But her family has enemies, and when she's accused, it shocks everyone. Even the jury initially finds her not guilty. But the judges aren't satisfied, so they ask the jury to reconsider. Under pressure, they reverse their verdict. Rebecca is excommunicated from the church, and on July 19, 1692, she's hanged along with 4 other women. Her execution proves that no one is safe, not even the devout and elderly. If they can hang Rebecca Nurse, they can hang anyone. Rebecca Nurse represents everything the Puritan community claims to value. She's a grandmother, a faithful church member for decades, known for her piety and kindness. She's raised 8 children, all of whom grew into respectable adults. She's cared for the sick in the community, offered comfort to the grieving, and lived a life that would make even the most judgmental Puritan grudgingly nod in approval. If there's a Puritan merit badge for being a model Christian woman, Rebecca earned it years ago, and has several extras to spare. But Rebecca has 2 problems. First, she's partially deaf, and often has trouble hearing what's being said around her, which in the paranoid atmosphere of Salem makes her seem evasive or confused when she doesn't respond immediately to questions. Second, and far more dangerous, her family, the Nurses and their in-laws, the Towns, have been in bitter disputes with the Putnam family for years over land boundaries, church politics and various grievances that have festered for decades. And wouldn't you know it, Ann Putnam Jr., the most prolific accuser, is a Putnam. So is her mother, Ann Putnam Sr., who also claims to be afflicted and joins in accusing Rebecca. This isn't about witchcraft. This is about property lines and old grudges, except now those grudges come with a death sentence. When Rebecca is first accused in late March 1692, the community reacts with shock and disbelief. This isn't some tavern owner in red clothes or a homeless beggar everyone already disliked. This is Rebecca Nurse, for God's sake! 39 of her neighbours immediately sign a petition testifying to her good character, which is remarkable in a community where most people are too scared to defend anyone. The petition describes her as a model of Christian virtue, someone who has lived piously and helped others her entire life. It's one of the strongest character defences in the entire witch trials. It doesn't matter. Rebecca's examination on March 24th is heartbreaking to read. She's brought into the meeting house, elderly and frail, hard of hearing, and clearly confused about what's happening. The moment she enters, the afflicted girl starts screaming and falling down. Ann Putnam Jr. and the others claim Rebecca's spectre is tormenting them right now, pinching and choking them. Rebecca looks around, bewildered. She can barely hear the questions being shouted at her over the girls shrieking. Magistrate Hathorne asks her why she hurts these children. Rebecca says she doesn't hurt anyone. She's never hurt anyone in her life. He asks again, louder. She cups her ear, trying to hear. The girls interpret her hand movement as a command to them and start mimicking her, claiming she's using witchcraft to control their bodies. Everything she does, adjusting her clothing, shifting her weight, even breathing, is mirrored by the accusers and presented as evidence that she's controlling them through supernatural means. At one point during the examination, Rebecca makes a comment about another accused woman, saying something about how that woman was always among others, or one of them. The exact phrasing is unclear in the records. The magistrate sees on this ambiguous statement, claiming she's admitting there's a group of witches and she knows who they are. Rebecca tries to clarify that she meant nothing of the sort, that she was just making an observation, but the damage is done. Her words are twisted into a confession of insider knowledge about a witch conspiracy. The touch test is performed multiple times. Each time Rebecca touches one of the afflicted girls, the girl stops convulsing, then starts again when Rebecca steps back. It's the same theatrical performance that's been used against dozens of others, and it works just as well against a 71-year-old grandmother as it did against everyone else. The magistrates record each instance as proof of her witchcraft. Rebecca keeps insisting she's innocent, that she's a faithful Christian, that this is all a terrible mistake. No one in authority listens. What's particularly cruel about Rebecca's case is that you can see her trying to understand what's happening. She's not defensive or angry like some of the accused. She's genuinely baffled. She asks the magistrates what she's supposed to have done. She asks why these girls are accusing her. She points out that she's been a good Christian her whole life. She's trying to reason with people who've abandoned reason. At one point, she says, "I can say before my eternal Father I am innocent, and God will clear my innocency." It's a statement of simple faith from a woman who genuinely believes that truth will prevail. It's also tragically naive. After her examination, Rebecca is sent to jail, where she spends months in the cold, filthy conditions. Her health deteriorates. Her family visits when they can, bringing food and blankets. But there's little they can do. The petition they circulated on her behalf, while impressive, hasn't swayed the authorities. If anything, it's made some people suspicious of the nurse family. Why are they defending her so vigorously unless they're witches too? Several of Rebecca's family members will themselves be accused in the coming months. Rebecca's trial takes place on June 29th, 1692, before the court of Oyer and Terminer. The evidence against her is the usual collection of spectral testimony, touch test results, and statements from the afflicted girls. But something unexpected happens. The jury actually deliberates carefully and returns a verdict of not guilty. The courtroom erupts. The afflicted girls start screaming and convulsing. The magistrates look furious. This is not the verdict they wanted. Chief Justice William Stoughton, who's presiding over the trial, immediately addresses the jury. He's not satisfied with their verdict. He asks them to reconsider. Specifically, he asks them to explain a statement Rebecca made during the trial, where she referred to another accused woman as one of us. The jury had interpreted this innocently, but Stoughton suggests it means Rebecca was admitting to being part of a witch coven. He sends the jury back to deliberate again. The jury, under enormous pressure from the judges, the afflicted girls who are having fits in the courtroom, and the general atmosphere of hysteria, reverses their decision. They find Rebecca guilty. It's one of the most blatant examples of judicial misconduct in the trials, a judge openly pressuring a jury to change their verdict because he doesn't like it. Rebecca's family later tries to explain what she meant by one of us, that she was simply referring to the other woman being one of the accused prisoners, not one of a witch group. But the explanation comes too late. The verdict stands. After the guilty verdict, Rebecca is excommunicated from the church. This is spiritually devastating for her. She's been a faithful member for decades, and now she's being formally cut off from the religious community that's been central to her identity. The excommunication ceremony is brutal. Her name is read aloud, her sins declared, and she's formally cast out. For someone as devout as Rebecca, this might hurt more than the physical death sentence. Her family doesn't give up. They petition Governor Phipps for a reprieve. Remarkably, he grants one, a temporary stay of execution while her case is reviewed. For a brief moment, there's hope. Maybe sanity will prevail. Maybe the authorities will realize they're about to execute a 71-year-old grandmother whose only crime was having the wrong enemies. But the afflicted girls and their supporters aren't done. They pressure the governor, claiming that Rebecca is still tormenting them from jail, that her spectre is flying around Salem causing havoc. Within days, Phipps reverses his decision. The execution will proceed as scheduled. On July 19th, 1692, Rebecca Nurse is loaded into a cart with 4 other condemned women: Sarah Good, Susanna Martin, Elizabeth Howe, and Sarah Wilds. It's a grim procession through Salem to Gallows Hill. Rebecca is so weak that she has to be supported. Her family follows, weeping openly. The crowd that gathers is larger than usual. People are curious to see if the authorities will really go through with hanging someone as respected as Rebecca Nurse. They do. All 5 women are hanged that day. According to some accounts, Rebecca continues to maintain her innocence to the very end, praying aloud for God to forgive her accusers and to receive her soul. She dies slowly, strangled by the noose, while her family watches in horror and her accusers watch in satisfaction. The minister presiding over the execution doesn't offer her any final comfort. She's been excommunicated, after all, cut off from the church's grace. After Rebecca's body is cut down, there's a problem. Where to bury her? Executed witches aren't supposed to be buried in consecrated ground or church cemeteries. They're usually dumped in shallow graves on Gallows Hill or in unmarked pits. But Rebecca's family isn't about to let her body be treated like refuse. According to family legend, her sons sneak back to Gallows Hill under cover of darkness, dig up her body, and secretly transport it back to the family property. They bury her there in an unmarked grave to protect it from authorities who might try to dig her up or desecrate it. The exact location is kept secret for generations. Rebecca Nurse's execution represents a turning point in the witch trials, though not the one you'd hope for. If the authorities were willing to hang someone as universally respected as Rebecca, it meant no one was safe. Not church members, not the elderly, not people with spotless reputations. The trials had moved beyond targeting society's margins, the poor, the strange, the vulnerable. Now they were consuming the community's core. The psychological impact on Salem can't be overstated. People who'd felt safe because of their good standing now realized their standing meant nothing. If Rebecca Nurse could be convicted on spectral evidence and touch tests, if a jury could be pressured into reversing a not guilty verdict, if 39 character witnesses could be ignored, then the rules they thought governed their society were gone. There was no safety in piety, no protection in reputation, no defense in innocence. Rebecca's family was devastated, but also radicalized. Several of her children and relatives became vocal critics of the trials, risking their own lives to speak out against the injustice. Some were accused themselves. Her sister Mary Eastie would be hanged less than 2 months later. But they kept speaking out, kept fighting, even when it was dangerous. Rebecca's death created martyrs and eventually resistors. Years later, after the trials ended and Salem began its slow, guilty reckoning with what had happened, Rebecca Nurse became a symbol of the trial's injustice. In 1711, the Massachusetts legislature officially reversed her conviction and offered restitution to her heirs. In 1712, her excommunication was formally reversed by the Salem Church. These gestures came far too late. Rebecca had been dead for 20 years, but they acknowledged what everyone who knew her had understood all along. She was innocent. She'd always been innocent. Today, the Rebecca Nurse homestead still stands in Danvers, Massachusetts, formerly Salem Village. It's a museum now, preserved as a reminder of what happened when fear and accusation replaced evidence and justice. Her grave is there, finally marked after generations of secrecy. Visitors come to pay respects to a woman who died because she lived in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong enemies. Rebecca Nurse didn't just die on Gallows Hill. She proved that Salem's witch hunt was never about finding actual witches. It was about fear, power, and the settling of scores. And once the community was willing to kill its own saints, there was no bottom to how far it could fall. Giles Corey is 80 years old, stubborn as a mule, and absolutely not interested in this witch trial nonsense. When he's accused, he refuses to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, which under English law means he can't be tried. The court, annoyed by his defiance, decides to use peine forte et dure, a medieval torture method where they lay you on the ground and pile heavy stones on your chest until you either enter a plea or die. For 2 days, they add more and more weight. Giles, legend has it, only says 2 words, more weight. He dies on September 19, 1692, crushed beneath the stones, but never giving the court the satisfaction of a confession. He's a hero of petty defiance, and honestly, we love him for it. Before we get to Giles Corey's legendary death, let's talk about who he was in life, because understanding that makes his final act even more remarkable. Giles wasn't some educated philosopher or religious martyr. He was a crusty old farmer with a reputation for being cantankerous and litigious. He'd been involved in multiple lawsuits over the years, property disputes, accusations of theft, various neighbourhood conflicts. He once beat one of his farmhands so badly that the man died, though Giles was never convicted of murder. He was a member of the church, but not particularly known for his piety. In short, he was an ornery old man who'd lived a rough life and didn't suffer fools gladly. Giles had been married to Martha Corey, his third wife, for about 10 years when the witch trials began. Martha was more educated and more religious than Giles, a full member of the church who actually understood theology and wasn't afraid to speak her mind. When the afflicted girls first started having their fits, Martha made the fatal mistake of expressing skepticism. She suggested, quite reasonably, that maybe these teenage girls weren't being entirely honest. She questioned the validity of spectral evidence. She thought the whole thing might be getting out of hand. In Puritan Salem, 1692, expressing doubt about the witch hunt was basically signing your own death warrant. Martha was accused in March, and Giles, surprisingly, initially testified against her. This is one of the more complicated and sad aspects of the story. Either Giles genuinely believed his wife might be a witch, which seems unlikely given his later actions, or he was pressured or confused during his testimony. Some historians think he might have been trying to distance himself from Martha's skepticism to save his own skin. Whatever his reasoning, he gave testimony that didn't help her case. He mentioned some odd things that had happened around the house, strange noises, the cat acting weird, the kind of things that happen in any old farmhouse, but that the court interpreted as evidence of witchcraft. Martha was convicted and sentenced to hang. And then, in April, Giles himself was accused. The afflicted girls claimed his spectre was tormenting them. Suddenly, the 80-year-old farmer who'd testified against his own wife was on the other side of the accusation. Some people think Giles was accused specifically because he'd testified against Martha. If he was married to a witch and living in her house, he must be one too. Others think it was retaliation by the Putnam family, with whom Giles had old property disputes. Either way, he was arrested and thrown into jail. Giles's examination in April was typical of the witch trial proceedings. He denied everything. The afflicted girls shrieked and fell down when he entered. The touch test was performed. He was asked why he tormented the children, when he signed the devil's book, why he was in league with Satan. He maintained his innocence throughout, but it didn't matter. The evidence against him was the same spectral testimony and theatrical performances that had convicted everyone else. He was held for trial. Here's where Giles Corey makes a decision that will immortalise him. Under English common law, which Massachusetts still followed, a person couldn't be tried unless they entered a plea, either guilty or not guilty. If you refused to plea, you couldn't be tried, which meant you couldn't be convicted, which meant your property couldn't be confiscated by the court. This was important because if you were convicted of witchcraft, your estate was forfeited to the crown, your family got nothing, your land, your livestock, your house, all seized. Giles knew that if he went to trial, he'd be convicted. He'd seen what happened to everyone else. The spectral evidence, the touch tests, the girls' performances. It was a rigged game. But if he refused to enter a plea, he couldn't be tried. The court couldn't convict him. And most importantly, they couldn't take his property. His sons-in-law could inherit his land. His family would be provided for. So when he was brought before the court in September and asked how he pleaded, Giles Corey said nothing. He stood mute. The magistrates were furious. They ordered him to enter a plea. He refused. They threatened him. He stayed silent. They sent him back to jail and brought him back several days later. Same question. Same silence. The court had a problem. They couldn't let Giles just sit in jail forever refusing to cooperate. It would set a precedent, and other accused people might try the same tactic. They needed to force him to enter a plea. So they dusted off a medieval torture technique that was technically legal but rarely used. Peine forte et dure, which translates to hard and forceful punishment. The procedure was simple and horrific. The accused person would be stripped naked, laid on their back on the ground, and have a wooden board placed on their chest. Then heavy stones would be piled on the board, one by one, increasing the pressure until the person either agreed to enter a plea or died. It was torture designed not to punish, but to compel cooperation. On September 19th, 1692, they took 80-year-old Giles Corey to an open field near the jail. According to accounts, Sheriff George Corwin supervised the procedure. Giles was stripped and laid on the ground. The board was placed on his chest, and then they began adding stones. The weight made it difficult to breathe, crushing his chest cavity, pressing the air from his lungs. Each breath became a struggle. The pressure was excruciating. The authorities kept asking him, "Will you enter a plea? Will you stand trial?" Giles said nothing, or according to legend, only 2 words: more weight. Whether he actually said this or whether it's been embellished over the years is debated by historians, but it's absolutely the kind of thing a stubborn, defiant 80-year-old who decided he wasn't going to give these bastards the satisfaction would say. It's the ultimate act of spite, essentially telling his torturers to go ahead and finish the job because he's not playing their game. The torture continued for 2 days. Yes, 2 days. They didn't pile all the stones on at once. That would have killed him too quickly. They added weight gradually, periodically asking if he was ready to enter a plea, giving him chances to save himself. He never took them. Between the crushing weight, the inability to breathe properly, exposure to the elements, and his advanced age, Giles Corey's body slowly gave out. There are various accounts of his final moments. Some say his tongue was pressed out of his mouth by the pressure, and Sheriff Corwin pushed it back in with his cane. A grotesque detail that may or may not be true, but that became part of the legend. Some say he tried to speak, but couldn't. Some say he remained silent and defiant to the very end. What's certain is that on September 19th, 1692, Giles Corey died under the stones without ever entering a plea. His death had the effect he intended. Because he was never tried or convicted, his property wasn't forfeited. His sons-in-law inherited his substantial land holdings. Giles had beaten the system through sheer bloody-minded stubbornness, even though it cost him his life. He'd denied the court its conviction and protected his family's inheritance. It was a Pyrrhic victory, but a victory nonetheless. Giles Corey's death shocked even the hardened participants in the witch trials. Pressing someone to death was legal, but it was savage and archaic, a relic of medieval justice that seemed extreme even by Salem's standards. Some people began to question whether the authorities had gone too far. If they were willing to torture an 80-year-old man to death for refusing to cooperate, what did that say about the legitimacy of the entire proceeding? But the trials didn't stop. Just 3 days after Giles died, his wife Martha was hanged on Gallows Hill, along with 7 others. She went to her death knowing her husband had been tortured to death, and that her skepticism about the witch trials had been absolutely justified. The Coreys became one of the trial's tragic couples, 2 elderly people who questioned or resisted the hysteria and paid for it with their lives. Giles Corey's legacy is complicated. He wasn't a saint. He'd lived a rough life, had a violent past, and even testified against his own wife at first. But his final act transformed him into a folk hero, a symbol of resistance against tyranny and injustice. The image of an 80-year-old man being crushed to death while defiantly demanding more weight resonates across centuries as the ultimate refusal to cooperate with corrupt authority. In the years after the trials, as Salem began to reckon with what it had done, Giles Corey's death became particularly emblematic of the court's cruelty. In 1712, his excommunication from the church was reversed. In 1711, the Massachusetts legislature authorized restitution to his heirs. These symbolic gestures came far too late, but they acknowledged that Giles had been wronged. Today, Giles Corey is remembered not for the life he lived, but for the death he chose. He's celebrated in literature, including Arthur Miller's The Crucible, where his character serves as a model of integrity and resistance. There's a memorial to him in Salem. Legends have grown around his story. Some say his ghost haunts Salem, cursing the sheriff's office because Sheriff Corwin presided over his torture. Whether or not you believe in ghosts, the story shows how Giles's death haunted the community's conscience. What makes Giles Corey's story so powerful is its simplicity. He wasn't a scholar who could argue theology or law. He wasn't a charismatic leader who rallied others to resistance. He was just a stubborn old man who decided that if the system was going to kill him anyway, he'd at least die on his own terms and protect his family in the process. It's an act of defiance so pure and so costly that it cuts through all the complexity of the witch trials and reveals their essential injustice. The Salem authorities wanted confessions. They wanted compliance. They wanted accused people to admit guilt, name accomplices, and validate the entire witch-hunting enterprise. Most people, faced with torture or execution, gave them what they wanted. Giles Corey refused. He looked at the stones being piled on his chest and essentially said, "Is that all you've got?" It didn't save his life, but it saved his dignity and his family's future. And in a time and place where dignity and defiance were in desperately short supply, that meant everything. For the teenage girls at the centre of the trials, this is the most attention they've ever received in their short, boring lives. Suddenly, adults are hanging on their every word. Their accusations can destroy families and send people to the gallows. It's intoxicating. Some historians believe the girls genuinely believed they were afflicted, perhaps through hysteria, ergot poisoning, or psychological suggestion. Others think they knew exactly what they were doing and enjoyed the power. Either way, no one stops them. No one questions whether maybe, just maybe, these teenage girls might not be the most reliable witnesses, and so the accusations keep coming, and the body count keeps rising. Let's talk about what life was like for these girls before they became the most powerful people in Salem. They were nobodies. In Puritan society, teenage girls ranked somewhere between livestock and furniture in terms of social importance. They had no rights, no voice, no autonomy. They couldn't own property, make decisions about their own lives, or speak in church. They were expected to be silent, obedient and useful, spinning wool, cooking meals, caring for younger siblings, and waiting to be married off to whatever man their father chose. Their opinions on literally anything were unwanted and irrelevant. Their daily lives were mind-numbingly boring. Wake up before dawn, pray, work, pray again, more work. Sit through hours of church services where they weren't allowed to move or make a sound. Eat bland food. Sleep on uncomfortable straw. Repeat forever until they died, probably in childbirth, hopefully having produced several sons. There was no school for most of them, no books except the Bible, no games, no music, no art, no fun of any kind. Entertainment was sinful. Laughter was suspicious. Even smiling too much could get you accused of being prideful or worldly. And then, suddenly, in early 1692, everything changes. Betty Paris and Abigail Williams start having fits, and instead of being punished or ignored, they become the centre of attention. Adults gather around them, concerned and frightened. Ministers come to pray over them. Doctors examine them. Everyone wants to know what's wrong, what's happening, what they're experiencing. For the first time in their lives, people are listening to them. People care what they think and feel. It's addictive. When the girls start naming names and those names lead to arrests, they learn something powerful. Their words have consequences. Real, immediate, dramatic consequences. They point at someone and say, "That person is hurting me," and within days, that person is in jail. They claim someone's spectre attacked them in a dream, and magistrates write it down as evidence. They fall on the floor and writhe around. An entire courtroom stop to watch. They've gone from invisible to indispensable overnight, and then other girls start joining in. Ann Putnam Jr., just 12 years old, sees what Betty and Abigail are getting. Attention, importance, power. And she wants it too. Her fits become even more dramatic. She sees more spectres, names more witches, experiences more torments. Mercy Lewis joins in. So does Mary Walcott, Elizabeth Hubbard, and eventually nearly a dozen girls and young women, ranging from 9 to 20 years old. They feed off each other, each one trying to prove her affliction is more severe, her visions more detailed, her suffering more genuine. The group dynamic is fascinating and horrifying. The girls develop a shared language of affliction. They know which gestures and sounds get the best reactions. They coordinate their performances. When one girl starts shrieking during a courtroom examination, the others join in within seconds. When one claims to see a yellow bird, supposedly a witch's familiar, suddenly several others see it too, confirming each other's testimony. They're like a very dark, very deadly improv troupe that's learned the audience always believes them. Some of the girls are clearly performing. You can see it in the historical records, the way they time their fits for maximum dramatic impact, the way they stop convulsing the instant an accused person touches them in the touch test, the way they mirror each other's symptoms. There's coordination happening, whether conscious or unconscious. They've figured out the formula and they're executing it flawlessly. But here's where it gets complicated. Some of them probably do believe they're afflicted. After months of performing symptoms, after being told repeatedly by every authority figure that they're victims of witchcraft, after watching people get arrested and executed based on their testimony, the line between performance and belief blurs. They've been having fits for so long that it's become their identity. They're the afflicted girls. That's who they are now. Admitting it's fake would mean losing everything. The attention, the importance, the power. Ann Putnam Jr. is the most prolific accuser, ultimately naming 62 people over the course of the trials. 62! That's not a few enemies or a personal grudge, that's a sustained campaign. Some historians believe her father, Thomas Putnam, coached her and used her as a weapon in his various feuds and property disputes. Every time Thomas Putnam had a problem with someone coincidentally, Anne would soon have a vision of that person's spectre tormenting her. It's awfully convenient. But Anne is also just 12 years old, under enormous pressure, praised when she accuses and encouraged to accuse more. She's trapped in a role she may not even fully understand. Mercy Lewis is 17 and has lived through genuine trauma. She survived a Native American attack that killed her parents. She's working as a servant in the Putnam household, which means she has no family, no status, and no future except hard labour. When she starts having fits and making accusations, she suddenly matters. People listen to her. She has agency for the first time since her parents died. Can you blame her for not wanting to give that up? The adult community enables all of this. Instead of considering that teenage girls might be unreliable narrators of their own experiences, the magistrates and ministers treat their every word as sacred truth. The girls are never challenged, never questioned, never held accountable. When their stories contradict each other, adults explain it away. When their accusations become increasingly outlandish, they're seeing spectres everywhere, attending witch meetings with dozens of participants, being tortured nightly. No one suggests that maybe this has gotten out of hand. The girls learn they can accuse anyone. At first they stick to safe targets, social outcasts, unpopular people, those with bad reputations. But as the trials progress and they're believed every single time, they get bolder. They accuse church members, they accuse wealthy landowners, they accuse the wife of a minister. At one point, accusations extend to people in nearby towns, and even to the governor's wife, which is finally a step too far. But for months, there are no limits. If the girls say it, it's true. What's particularly disturbing is how the girls seem to enjoy the courtroom performances. There are accounts of them smirking at each other, barely suppressing giggles between fits. During one examination, a witness notes that the girls seemed to make sport of the proceedings. They're teenagers who've discovered they can control adults, destroy reputations and command audiences. Some of them are probably terrified by what they've started and don't know how to stop. Others are clearly having the time of their lives. The magistrates actively encourage the girls to have more visions and name more names. After each successful conviction, the girls are praised for their bravery in helping expose Satan's servants. They're told they're doing God's work. They're treated as heroes and martyrs. This positive reinforcement creates a feedback loop. The more they accuse, the more they're validated, so they accuse more. It's operant conditioning, except the reward for the behaviour is the death of innocent people. There's also social pressure within the group of afflicted girls. Once you've joined the group and started having fits, you can't really stop without looking suspicious. If the other girls are seeing spectres and you're not, are you less afflicted? Are you not trying hard enough? Or worse, are you secretly protecting the witches? The group dynamic compels conformity. You have to keep up with the others, keep proving your affliction is real, keep contributing names. Some of the accused try to point out how convenient it is that teenage girls with no power or prospects have suddenly become the most important people in Salem. John Proctor writes to Boston ministers suggesting that maybe the girls should be whipped for lying, which was the traditional Puritan punishment for deceptive children. His suggestion is ignored, and he's hanged anyway. Martha Corey laughs at the absurdity of being accused by distracted children, meaning children who are clearly not in their right minds. She's hanged too. Suggesting the girls are anything less than completely reliable victims is taken as evidence you're a witch trying to discredit your accusers. The girls develop specialties. Ann Putnam Jr. is best at detailed spectral visions. She can describe witch meetings, name attendees, provide elaborate narratives. Mercy Lewis specialises in physical torments. She's always being choked, pinched, bitten. Mary Walcott is particularly good at timing. Her fits always happen at the most dramatically appropriate moments. They're like a terrible supergroup where each member brings their unique talent to the shared goal of ruining lives. By the summer of 1692, the afflicted girls are essentially running Salem. Court proceedings are scheduled around their fits. Magistrates defer to their testimony over physical evidence or alibis. They can walk into a room, point at someone they've never met, claim that person's spectre has been tormenting them for weeks, and watch that person get arrested within hours. They're teenagers with the power of life and death. It's Lord of the Flies meets Puritan New England, except instead of being stranded on an island, they're destroying their own community. What's tragic is that no adults step in to protect these girls from themselves. No one says, this is too much responsibility for children. No one worries about the psychological damage they're experiencing from being at the centre of this horror. No one considers that maybe asking traumatised, bored, powerless teenage girls to serve as the justice system's primary witnesses isn't a great idea. Instead, the adults use them, encourage them, and then, after the trials end, quietly move on while the girls are left to carry the weight of what they've done. Years later, Ann Putnam Jr. will publicly apologise, claiming she was deluded by Satan and didn't understand what she was doing. It's one of the few apologies from any of the accusers, and even then, it shifts blame. She wasn't lying, she was deceived by the devil. The other girls mostly disappear from historical records, presumably living out their lives under assumed names or in quiet shame. Some get married, some die young. None of them are ever punished or held accountable for the role they played in killing 20 people and destroying countless families. The afflicted girls of Salem aren't villains exactly. They're products of a sick system that gave powerless people enormous power without teaching them responsibility or consequences. They're children and young women who found a way to matter in a society that told them they didn't. They're victims of their own time, their own circumstances, and the adults who should have protected them but instead weaponized them. But they're also the reason 20 innocent people died, and that's a complexity that no amount of historical context can fully resolve. If you're accused, you're not immediately tried. First, you're thrown into jail, which in Salem means a freezing, filthy cell with no heat, no sanitation, and no light. You're chained to the wall. You're surrounded by rats, lice, and other accused witches, all crammed together in the dark. You wait there for weeks or months while your trial is prepared. Oh, and you have to pay for your own imprisonment. Room and board, they call it. If you're eventually found innocent, you still owe money for your jail stay. If you can't pay, you stay in jail anyway. It's a lose-lose situation perfumed with human waste and despair. Let's start with the physical space, because calling it a jail is being generous. Salem's jail in 1692 is basically a wooden structure with stone foundations, small windows with iron bars, and cells that are more like cages. The walls are damp and covered in mould. The ceiling is low enough that tall people have to hunch. And the smell. Imagine unwashed bodies, open buckets used as toilets, rotting straw, illness, fear, and death, all fermenting together in a confined space with poor ventilation. It's a sensory assault that never stops. You can't escape it because you're literally chained to the wall. Yes, chained. When you're brought in as an accused witch, you're not just locked in a cell and left to wander around. You're fitted with iron shackles around your wrists and ankles, connected by chains to iron rings bolted into the wall or floor. The shackles are heavy, rough, and they chafe. Within days, your wrists and ankles are raw and bleeding. The chains are short enough that you can't stand fully upright or lie down comfortably. You can sit. You can sort of crouch. That's about it. It's designed to be uncomfortable enough to break your spirit, but not so immediately lethal that you die before trial. The cells are overcrowded. Salem jail wasn't built to hold hundreds of accused witches. It was meant for the occasional thief or debtor. But by the summer of 1692, over 150 people have been accused, and they're all being crammed into this facility. Multiple people share cells that are barely big enough for one. You're pressed up against strangers, some of whom you might have known as neighbours, others who are complete strangers from other towns. There's no privacy. When you need to use the waste bucket in the corner, everyone sees and smells it. When you cry, everyone hears. When you pray, people pray with you or curse at you to shut up depending on their mood. The darkness is oppressive. The cells have tiny windows, barely slits really, that let in minimal light. In the summer, they let in heat and flies. In the winter, they let in freezing wind and snow. Most of the time, the cells are in semi-darkness, or complete darkness. You lose track of time. Days blend together. You don't know if it's morning or afternoon or midnight. Your internal clock breaks down. Some prisoners go weeks without seeing sunlight. And then there's the cold. In a New England winter, Salem jail is barely warmer than the outside air. There's no heating system, no fireplace in the cells. You have whatever clothes you were wearing when you were arrested, and if your family can afford to bring you blankets, you might have one thin, dirty blanket. Otherwise, you huddle with other prisoners for warmth, pressing bodies together to share heat, trying not to freeze to death before your trial. Several accused people do die in jail from exposure, illness, or malnutrition. Sarah Osborne dies there in May 1692, never making it to trial. Others succumb to fever, pneumonia, or simply giving up. The food is whatever your family can afford to bring you. There's no jail cafeteria, no meal service. If you have family members who can afford to buy food and bribe the guards to let them deliver it, you eat. If not, you starve. The guards don't care if you eat or not, that's not their problem. Some prisoners receive bread, cheese, thin gruel, maybe an apple if they're lucky. Others get nothing for days at a time. Malnutrition is rampant. People waste away, their bodies becoming skeletal, their minds foggy from hunger. And here's the cruelest part. You're being charged for all of this. Every day you spend in jail, you're racking up debt. The jailkeeper charges fees for your accommodation, for your chains, for the guard's time. It's like the world's worst hotel where you didn't choose to stay. The amenities are torture devices, and you're still getting a bill at the end. These fees can amount to substantial sums, several pounds, which for a poor family might represent months or years of income. When you're eventually released, either because you're found not guilty, rare, or because the trials finally end, later, you can't leave until your jail fees are paid in full. This creates a nightmarish situation where innocent people who've been exonerated are still imprisoned because they can't afford to pay for the privilege of being falsely accused and tortured. Some people spend additional months or even years in jail after the witch trials officially end, simply because they're too poor to pay their way out. Tituba, for example, confesses in March 1692, which saves her from execution. But she sits in jail for over a year until someone finally pays her fees and buys her from Reverend Paris, transferring her enslavement to a new owner. She survives the witch trials only to be sold like property to pay off her jail debt. It's a grotesque footnote to an already tragic story. The psychological toll of jail is immense. You're living in constant fear, not knowing when or if you'll be tried, not knowing if you'll be convicted, not knowing if you'll ever see your family again. You hear other prisoners being taken away for examination or trial. Sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. You hear rumours about who's been convicted, who's been hanged. You know your turn is coming. The waiting is almost worse than the trial itself because at least the trial is an endpoint. The waiting is endless, grinding, soul-crushing uncertainty. Children are imprisoned too. Dorothy Good, Sarah Good's 4-year-old daughter, is accused of witchcraft and thrown into jail along with her mother. She's chained like an adult, kept in the dark and cold, separated from her mother. The trauma breaks her mind. Even after she's eventually released, historical records indicate she was never mentally sound again. She's 4 years old when this happens. 4. The Salem authorities looked at a preschooler and decided she needed to be imprisoned in chains for witchcraft. Pregnant women are imprisoned without any special accommodations. Sarah Good is pregnant when she's arrested. She gives birth in jail, and the baby dies shortly after. The conditions aren't suitable for sustaining life, let alone bringing new life into the world. But the court doesn't care. If you're accused, you're imprisoned, regardless of your physical condition or vulnerability. Disease spreads rapidly in the overcrowded, unsanitary conditions. Jail fever, probably typhus, dysentery, and other illnesses pass from prisoner to prisoner. When one person gets sick, everyone in the cell is exposed. There's no medical care. If you're fortunate, your family might bring you herbs or remedies. If not, you just suffer through it and hope your body is strong enough to fight it off. Many prisoners are already weakened by malnutrition, cold, and stress, so their immune systems are compromised. Death from disease is common. The guards are not sympathetic. Some are actively cruel, using their power to humiliate or abuse prisoners. Sheriff George Corwin, who oversees much of the imprisonment and later executes Giles Corey, is known for his brutality. He confiscates prisoners' property, extorts their families, and shows no mercy to the accused. Other guards are simply indifferent. You're a witch, as far as they're concerned, so whatever happens to you is what you deserve. Some prisoners try to maintain their humanity through prayer, through supporting each other, through small acts of kindness. They share what little food they have. They comfort each other in the darkness. They pray together, holding hands through their chains. In the midst of horror, these small moments of connection are what keep some people from going completely mad. Others do go mad. The combination of sensory deprivation, isolation, terror and physical suffering breaks minds. Some prisoners stop speaking, others talk to themselves constantly, some laugh at nothing. The line between sanity and madness becomes very thin. Families of the imprisoned suffer too. If you're arrested, your spouse and children are left without your labour or income. In an agricultural society where every family member's work is essential for survival, losing one person can mean economic ruin, and there's the stigma. Being related to an accused witch makes you suspicious too. Your children might be ostracised at church. Your neighbours might refuse to trade with you. Your extended family might distance themselves to avoid being tainted by association. Visiting the jail is difficult and expensive. You have to get permission from the guards, which often requires bribing them. You're allowed limited time, watch the entire time, and you can't have private conversations. Guards eavesdrop on everything, looking for incriminating statements that can be used against you or your loved one at trial. So even visits, which should be moments of comfort and connection, are fraught with danger. You have to be careful what you say. You can't speak freely. You can't truly comfort each other because every word might be used as evidence. Some prisoners use their time in jail to write letters, pleading their innocence, begging for help, trying to arrange their affairs. These letters are heartbreaking to read. Desperate attempts to communicate with the outside world, to maintain connections with family, to assert their humanity in a system that's treating them as less than human. Many of these letters were intercepted by authorities or simply went unanswered because who's going to help an accused witch? The worst part of jail, even worse than the physical conditions, is the waiting. You don't know when your trial will be. You don't know what evidence they have against you. You don't know who's testified against you or what they've said. You're in limbo, unable to defend yourself, unable to prepare, just waiting for a trial you know is rigged against you. Some people wait weeks, some wait months. The uncertainty is maddening, and when you finally are taken to trial, you're brought out from this hell into a courtroom full of hostile faces. You're weak from malnutrition, sick from exposure, traumatized from weeks or months of imprisonment. Your mind isn't sharp. You can barely think straight. You haven't had a proper meal or a full night's sleep in ages, and you're expected to defend yourself articulately against trained magistrates, coached witnesses, and theatrical accusers. It's not a fair fight. It was never meant to be. For those who are acquitted or eventually released when the trials end, the experience leaves permanent scars. The physical damage, malnutrition, disease, the wounds from shackles can last for years. The psychological trauma lasts a lifetime, and the financial burden of jail fees can cripple families for generations. You might have survived Salem jail, but it will have taken something from you that you can never get back. Salem jail in 1692 isn't a holding facility. It's a punishment in itself, a place designed to break bodies and spirits before trial even begins. And for many of the accused, it succeeds. The Puritans believe the devil is real, active, and constantly trying to recruit witches to destroy their godly community. Every bad thing that happens, crop failures, illness, arguments, is blamed on Satan's interference. And since they're God's chosen people, in their minds, the devil must be extra interested in them. This creates a culture of paranoia where everyone's a potential enemy and every misfortune is evidence of supernatural evil. Ministers like Cotton Mather fan the flames with sermons about the invisible world and the devil's army. Instead of calming people down, religious leaders make it worse, giving divine justification to the madness. Let's start with the Puritan worldview, because understanding their theology is essential to understanding how the witch trials happened. The Puritans don't see the world as a place of natural laws and random events. They see it as an active battlefield between cosmic forces, God and his angels on one side, Satan and his demons on the other. And humans? Humans are the prize being fought over. Every moment of every day, invisible spiritual warfare is happening all around them. It's like living in a Marvel movie, except the special effects are invisible and the stakes are eternal damnation. In this worldview, Satan isn't some abstract concept of evil or a metaphorical tempter. He's a real physical being with goals, strategies, and armies. He walks the earth, or flies through the air depending on which sermon you're hearing, actively recruiting people to join his cause. And his primary recruitment tool is witchcraft. By offering people supernatural powers in exchange for their souls, Satan builds his army. These witches then go out and torment the godly, cause misfortunes, and try to destroy God's chosen communities. It's a coherent theological system. It's just completely disconnected from reality. The Puritans believe they're God's chosen people, the inheritors of a divine mission to create a perfect Christian society in the New World. They fled England to escape religious persecution and establish a city upon a hill that would be a shining example to the world. But this sense of chosenness comes with a dark corollary. If they're especially important to God, then they must be especially threatening to Satan. The devil isn't going to waste his time on random pagans. He's going to focus his attacks on the Puritans because destroying them would be his greatest victory. This creates a paranoid feedback loop. Every setback, every misfortune, every conflict is interpreted as evidence that Satan is attacking them. Crop failure. Satan sent it to starve God's people. Disease outbreak. Satan unleashed it. Political disputes within the community. Satan is sowing discord. Native American attacks on the frontier. Satan is using the heathen savages as his instruments. There's no room for natural causes or random bad luck. Everything is spiritualized, everything is meaningful, and everything is part of the cosmic battle. Ministers reinforce this worldview constantly. Sermons in 1692, Salem are filled with vivid descriptions of the devil's activities, of the invisible world that surrounds the visible one, of the constant dangers facing the faithful. These aren't abstract theological discussions. They're horror stories designed to keep people vigilant and afraid. And fear, the ministers believe, is good. Fear keeps people focused on God, keeps them morally disciplined, keeps them from straying into sin. A terrified congregation is an obedient congregation. Cotton Mather, one of the most influential ministers in Massachusetts, is particularly guilty of fanning the flames. Mather is brilliant, Harvard-educated, fluent in multiple languages, a published author. But he's also deeply credulous about the supernatural. He's written extensively about demonic possession, witchcraft, and the invisible world. His book, Memorable Providences, relating to witchcrafts and possessions, published in 1689, essentially serves as a how-to guide for identifying witches. It describes cases of possessed children, their symptoms, and the witches responsible. The afflicted girls in Salem have almost certainly heard about or read this book, and their symptoms mirror the cases Mather describes. It's like they're following a script he wrote. When the Salem trials begin, Mather is deeply involved. He attends some of the executions, taking notes and observing. He writes letters supporting the court's work. He preaches sermons affirming that Salem is under genuine demonic attack. His authority as a respected minister and intellectual gives credibility to the entire witch hunt. If Cotton Mather says witches are real, and Salem is infested with them, who's going to argue? He's the expert. He's studied these things. He must know what he's talking about. But here's where Mather gets complicated. He also expresses some concerns about the trials, particularly about the over-reliance on spectral evidence. He warns that the devil could theoretically appear in the shape of an innocent person, which would make spectral testimony unreliable. He writes a letter along with other Boston ministers, urging caution and recommending higher standards of evidence. But, and this is crucial, he never says the trial should stop. He never says the accused are innocent. He just suggests being a little more careful while continuing to hunt witches. It's like suggesting someone use a better quality gasoline while they're committing arson. Other ministers are fully on board with no reservations. Samuel Parris, the Salem village minister, in whose home the afflictions began, has a vested interest in proving the witch threat is real. If his daughter and niece are faking or delusional, it makes him look like a bad parent and a gullible fool. So he doubles down, preaching sermons about how Satan has invaded Salem, how the community must root out evil, how anyone who doubts the afflicted girls is probably a witch themselves. His sermons become increasingly unhinged as the trials progress. Seeing devils and conspiracies everywhere, Nicholas Noyes, the minister of Salem town, actively participates in the trials. He attends interrogations and executions, praying over the accused, urging them to confess and save their souls. At Sarah Good's execution, when she curses him from the gallows, Noyes reportedly dismisses her, saying she's no more a witch than he is a wizard, which is either ironic confidence or spectacular obtuseness. Years later, after the trials are discredited, Noyes will publicly apologise for his role. But in 1692 he's a cheerleader for the witch hunt, using his religious authority to legitimise the killings. The theological framework the ministers provide makes the witch trials not just legal, but holy. This isn't just about protecting the community from criminals, it's about protecting God's kingdom from Satan's army. The accused aren't just lawbreakers, they're traitors to God, enemies of righteousness, servants of ultimate evil. Executing them isn't murder, it's spiritual warfare. It's doing God's work. The Bible itself commands, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," Exodus 22:18, and the Puritans take that literally. They're not being cruel, they're being obedient to Scripture. This religious justification makes it almost impossible to question the trials. If you express doubt about whether someone is really a witch, you're not just questioning legal proceedings, you're questioning whether God is protecting the community, whether the ministers understand theology correctly, whether the Bible itself is true. It's spiritual gaslighting on a massive scale. Doubt becomes heresy, skepticism becomes sin, and anyone who pushes back too hard gets accused themselves, which conveniently silences dissent. The Puritans also believe in visible sanctification, the idea that you can tell who's saved and who's damned by observing their behaviour and life circumstances. If you're prosperous, healthy and respected, it suggests God favours you. If you're poor, sick or unpopular, maybe God is punishing you for hidden sins. This creates a cruel calculus where the vulnerable are seen as spiritually suspect. Why would God allow you to become homeless unless you deserved it? Why would he let your children die unless you'd angered him? Witchcraft accusations often target people whose circumstances already suggest they're not in God's favour. Prayer is weaponized during the trials. Accused people are asked to recite the Lord's Prayer or other scripture perfectly, with the belief that witches can't speak holy words without Satan preventing them. When people stumble, and they always do because they're terrified and exhausted, it's taken as proof of demonic interference. The very prayers that are supposed to offer comfort and connection to God are turned into traps. Ministers also encourage people to examine their own souls for evidence of witchcraft's influence. Have you had strange dreams? That could be witches visiting you. Have you felt inexplicable anger or sadness? That could be demonic oppression. Have you struggled with doubt or sinful thoughts? That's definitely Satan's influence. This creates a culture where normal human experiences, nightmares, mood swings, intrusive thoughts, are reinterpreted as supernatural attacks. Everyone becomes a potential victim, which means everyone needs to be hypervigilant, which means everyone is constantly terrified. The concept of the Devil's Book is central to the trials. The afflicted girls repeatedly claim to have seen a book that Satan brings around for people to sign with their blood, like a demonic contract. The book supposedly contains the names of all the witches in New England. This imagery is powerful and terrifying. There's a list, a roster of traitors, and we need to expose everyone on it. It transforms individual accusations into the uncovering of a vast conspiracy. The girls claim they saw dozens, maybe hundreds of names in the book. How many witches are there? How deep does this go? The paranoia has no natural endpoint. Ministers also teach that witches attend Sabbaths, secret gatherings where they worship Satan, perform obscene rituals, and plot against the godly community. The afflicted girls describe these Sabbaths in lurid detail, claiming they were spiritually transported to them and forced to watch. The descriptions are theatrical and horrifying. Witches flying through the air, demonic feasts, perverse ceremonies. These accounts titillate and terrify the community, confirming their worst fears about what happens in the darkness beyond their watchful religious surveillance. What makes the religious dimension of the Salem trials so dangerous is that it removes moral uncertainty. In a normal legal proceeding, there might be doubt, mercy, the possibility of error. But when you frame the trials as spiritual warfare, doubt becomes impossible. You're either with God or with Satan. You're either hunting witches or protecting them. There's no middle ground, no room for nuance or skepticism. The ministers have created a theological framework that makes the witch hunt not just justifiable but mandatory. Some ministers do eventually express regret. Increase Mather, Cotton's father, publishes Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits in October 1692, arguing more forcefully against spectral evidence and suggesting the trials have gone too far. But by then, 20 people are dead. His caution comes too late to save them, and even his criticism is framed carefully. He's not saying witches don't exist or that Salem wasn't under attack. He's just suggesting the court maybe used the wrong methods. The underlying theology remains unchallenged. The religious leaders of Salem had an opportunity to be voices of reason, to calm the hysteria, to remind their congregations that God calls for justice, mercy, and humility. Instead, most of them chose to amplify the fear, to confirm the paranoia, to give divine sanction to judicial murder. They turned their pulpits into platforms for persecution and their theology into a weapon. And when it was over, when the bodies were buried and the community lay in ruins, some of them had the audacity to say they were just following God's will. But God didn't create the Salem Witch Trials. Humans did. Humans with theology degrees, with political power, with the ability to interpret Scripture in ways that justified their fears and prejudices. The devil didn't destroy Salem. Terrible theology did. And that's somehow even more frightening than any supernatural evil could ever be. Cotton Mather is one of the most influential ministers in Massachusetts, a Harvard graduate, a published author, and a man convinced he's fighting a holy war against Satan. He writes extensively about witchcraft and spectral evidence, giving intellectual credibility to the trials. His book, Memorable Providences, details supposed cases of demonic possession and becomes a manual for witch hunting. During the Salem trials, he attends hangings, takes notes, and encourages the court to continue. However, he also warns against relying too heavily on spectral evidence. While still supporting the trials overall, he's a walking contradiction, brilliant, devout, and dangerously wrong. Let's start with who Cotton Mather is, because understanding his background helps explain why his influence is so toxic. He's born in 1663 into Puritan royalty. His father is Increase Mather, president of Harvard, and one of the most respected ministers in New England. His grandfather on both sides were influential ministers. Cotton grows up in an environment of intense intellectual and religious expectation. He's a prodigy, entering Harvard at age 12, graduating at 15, fluent in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. By his early 20s, he's already published multiple books and established himself as one of the brightest theological minds in the colonies. But Cotton isn't just brilliant. He's also deeply insecure and desperate for recognition. He lives in his father's enormous shadow, and despite his accomplishments, he's constantly trying to prove he's worthy of the family legacy. He's also physically frail, has a stutter that he works his entire life to overcome, and suffers from what we'd now probably recognise as anxiety and obsessive tendencies. He keeps incredibly detailed diaries where he records his spiritual struggles, his fears that he's not godly enough, his constant self-examination for sin. He's a man who needs to be right, needs to be important, needs to be on the correct side of the cosmic battle between good and evil. Cotton Mather's interest in witchcraft predates Salem by years. In 1688, he gets involved in a case in Boston involving the Goodwin family. The Goodwin children start having fits, convulsions, strange speech, claims of being tormented by invisible forces. Sound familiar? Cotton takes the eldest daughter into his own home to observe her and document the phenomena. He's fascinated. He watches her fits, records her symptoms, prays over her, and eventually writes about the case in his 1689 book, Memorable Providences Relating to Witchcrafts and Possessions. This book becomes a bestseller by colonial standards. It's widely read throughout New England, and it essentially provides a template for identifying demonic possession and witchcraft. Cotton describes in vivid detail what possession looks like, the physical contortions, the inability to pray, the claims of spectral torment, the accusations against specific individuals. He argues that the invisible world is constantly interacting with the visible world, that devils and witches are real and active, and that godly communities must be vigilant in identifying and eliminating these threats. It's part theology, part horror story, and it's basically a how-to manual for what will happen in Salem a few years later. When the afflicted girls in Salem village start having their fits in 1692, Their symptoms closely mirror what Cotton Mather described in the Goodwin case. This isn't coincidental. People in Salem have read his book or heard his sermons. The girls may be consciously or unconsciously performing symptoms they've learned from Mather's descriptions. And when authorities need to understand what's happening, they turn to Mather's work as the authoritative text. He's the expert, the intellectual who studied these phenomena. If Cotton Mather says this is what demonic possession looks like, then that's what they're seeing. Cotton follows the Salem trials closely. He corresponds with judges, offers advice, and writes letters of encouragement. When people start questioning whether spectral evidence is reliable, Cotton writes a response defending its use, but with caveats. He argues that spectral evidence shouldn't be the only evidence, that there should be corroborating proof, that the devil could theoretically impersonate innocent people. On paper, these seem like reasonable cautions, but in practice, Cotton never says the trials should stop. He never says the accused are innocent. He just suggests being slightly more careful while continuing to hang witches. In fact, Cotton attends some of the executions. He watches George Burroughs hang on August 19, 1692. Burroughs is a former minister, which makes his execution particularly controversial. Standing on the gallows, Burroughs recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly, which according to popular belief witches can't do. The crowd murmurs. Some people are moved by his eloquence and obvious innocence. There's a moment where the execution might be stopped, and then Cotton Mather, sitting on his horse, addresses the crowd. He reminds them that the devil can appear as an angel of light, that Satan could enable a witch to recite prayers to deceive the faithful, that Burroughs has been legally convicted and the sentence must be carried out. The crowd quiets. The execution proceeds. Cotton Mather literally talks a crowd out of stopping an execution of an innocent man. After the trials, Cotton writes Wonders of the Invisible World, published in October 1692, which is essentially a defense of the trials. He includes trial transcripts, testimony, and his own commentary explaining why the convictions were just and necessary. He's trying to document for posterity that Salem did the right thing, that they successfully exposed and eliminated a dangerous witch conspiracy. The book is his attempt to cement the trial's legitimacy and his own role as the intellectual authority on witchcraft. It's propaganda dressed up as scholarship. But here's where Cotton Mather becomes truly maddening. He's not stupid, and he's not purely malicious. He genuinely believes he's protecting the community. In his mind, he's fighting a real supernatural threat. He sees himself as a soldier in God's army, using his intellect to help defeat Satan. He's motivated by sincere religious conviction, which somehow makes it worse, a cynical manipulator you can understand and condemn. But Cotton Mather is a true believer who uses his considerable intelligence to rationalize horror. Cotton also displays what we'd now recognize as cognitive dissonance. He can hold contradictory beliefs simultaneously without seeing the conflict. He warns against over-reliance on spectral evidence, while defending executions based primarily on spectral evidence. He expresses concern about false accusations, while encouraging the court to continue its work. He claims to value justice while attending executions he must have known were unjust. He's able to maintain these contradictions because he's convinced of his own righteousness. God is on his side, therefore whatever he supports must be correct. His relationship with his father, Increase Mather, becomes strained over the trials. Increase eventually publishes Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits, which more forcefully argues against spectral evidence and implies the trials have been conducted improperly. Cotton feels betrayed. His father is undermining the work Cotton has supported and defended. But Cotton can't directly contradict his father, who's more respected and senior. So Cotton tries to have it both ways, agreeing with some of his father's concerns while still defending the trials overall. It's intellectual gymnastics of the highest order. After the trials end and public opinion turns against them, Cotton never fully apologizes or admits he was wrong. He continues to insist that there really was a witch conspiracy in Salem, that the threat was real, but that perhaps some errors were made in identifying specific individuals. He frames it as a procedural problem, not a fundamental mistake. He can't admit that his theories about witchcraft, his books, his sermons, his presence at executions, all of it was based on delusion and contributed to killing innocent people. Admitting that would mean admitting his entire theological framework was flawed, and Cotton Mather's ego can't handle that. his legacy is deeply complicated. On one hand, Cotton Mather does some genuinely good things in his life. He's an early advocate for smallpox inoculation, which is scientifically progressive for his time and saves lives. He writes hundreds of books on theology, history, and science. He's a founding member of what becomes Yale University. He's prolific, intelligent, and genuinely cares about improving society. But on the other hand, his role in the Salem Witch Trials is indelible. He provided intellectual cover for judicial murder. He used his authority to silence doubt and encourage persecution. He watched innocent people die and wrote books defending their executions. Cotton Mather represents something dangerous, the intellectual who uses his brilliance to rationalize evil. He's the smart guy in the room who makes terrible ideas sound reasonable, who dresses up prejudice in theological language, who provides sophisticated arguments for fundamentally cruel actions. He's not a cartoon villain twirling his mustache. He's a respected scholar who genuinely thinks he's right. And that makes him more dangerous than any obvious monster could be. His writings continue to influence witch hunting for years after Salem. When people in other communities suspect witchcraft, they turn to Mather's books for guidance. His ideas about the invisible world, spectral evidence, and how to identify witches spread beyond Massachusetts. He's essentially created an instruction manual for persecution, wrapped in Harvard-educated credibility. In his later years, Cotton becomes increasingly isolated and bitter. The Salem trials have tarnished his reputation, though he never admits it. He continues writing prolifically, but his influence wanes. Younger ministers view him as a relic of an older, more superstitious era. When he dies in 1728, his funeral is well attended. He's still a Mather after all. But the eulogies are more dutiful than enthusiastic. History is already starting to judge him harshly. Modern historians are divided on Cotton Mather. Some emphasize his scientific contributions and his genuine desire to serve God and community. Others see him as an enabler of mass murder, a man whose pride and need for importance led him to support atrocities. The truth is probably both. He's a brilliant man who used his brilliance badly, a devout believer whose beliefs led him astray, an intellectual whose intellect failed him at the most crucial moment. What Cotton Mather teaches us is that intelligence without wisdom is dangerous, that education without empathy enables cruelty, and that being certain you're right is often a sign you're catastrophically wrong. He had every advantage: education, social position, intellectual gifts, access to power. He could have been a voice of reason, a force for justice, a check on hysteria. Instead, he chose to be a cheerleader for witch hunting, providing the intellectual framework that allowed ordinary people to convince themselves that killing their neighbours was holy work. Cotton Mather didn't personally hang anyone. He didn't serve as a judge or jury. He didn't even directly accuse people. But his books, his sermons, his letters, his presence at executions, all of it contributed to an environment where the Salem witch trials could happen and continue. He gave people permission to believe the worst about each other, to trust teenage girls over their own judgment, to see demons where there were only human beings, and for that, his legacy will forever be entangled with the innocent dead he helped send to the gallows. In the end, Cotton Mather got what he wanted. He's remembered. He's famous. His name is known centuries after his death. But he's remembered not as the brilliant defender of faith he imagined himself to be, but as a cautionary tale about what happens when smart people use their intelligence to justify the unjustifiable. He's a reminder that being educated doesn't make you right, being religious doesn't make you good, and being convinced of your own righteousness is often the most dangerous delusion of all. The majority of the accused are women, particularly women who don't fit neatly into Puritan gender roles. Widows with property, outspoken women, women who argued with neighbours, women who didn't attend church enough, women who were too independent, all targets. In Puritan society, women are expected to be silent, obedient, and subservient. Any deviation makes you suspicious. Meanwhile, the main accusers are also young women and girls, who suddenly wield enormous power in a society that normally silences them. It's a twisted dynamic where women are both the primary victims and the primary weapons of the witch hunt. Let's start with what it means to be a woman in Puritan New England, because the gender dynamics are essential to understanding why the witch trials unfold the way they do. In this society, Women are legally and socially subordinate to men in every possible way. A woman is first under her father's authority, then her husband's, and if widowed, theoretically under her adult son's. She can't vote, can't hold political office, can't serve on juries, can't testify in court on equal footing with men. Her primary purpose is to be a wife and mother, to produce children, preferably male children, to manage the household, and to support her husband's work. The ideal Puritan woman is silent, obedient, and nearly invisible. She doesn't speak in church. The Apostle Paul said women should be silent in the churches, and the Puritans take that literally. She doesn't express strong opinions, especially not to men. She doesn't argue, doesn't contradict, doesn't draw attention to herself. She's modest in dress and demeanour, never flashy or bold. She defers to male authority in all things. She's basically a supporting character in her own life, and any attempt to be more than that marks her as suspicious, unwomanly, possibly dangerous. Property ownership is where things get particularly complicated. When a woman's husband dies, she often inherits his property, at least temporarily. This makes her economically independent, which violates the natural order. A woman with property doesn't need to remarry immediately. She can make her own decisions. She has economic power, and economic power in a patriarchal society is threatening. Many of the accused women in Salem are widows with property. Sarah Good's poverty made her vulnerable, but women like Rebecca Nurse and Martha Corey, who have land and resources, are equally vulnerable because their independence challenges the social structure. The pattern is clear when you look at the statistics. Of the accused in Salem, about 78% are women, and within that group the women most at risk are those between 40 and 60, past childbearing age, often widowed or unmarried, potentially property owners, and old enough to have accumulated enemies and grievances over decades of life. These are women who've survived long enough to have their own opinions, their own resources, and their own presence in the community. In other words, women who are no longer defined primarily by their relationships to men. Outspoken women are targeted regardless of their economic status. Martha Corey makes the fatal mistake of suggesting the afflicted girls might not be entirely honest. She questions the witch hunt, using her own judgment instead of deferring to male authority. She's convicted and hanged. Sarah Good is poor and sharp-tongued, muttering to herself when people refuse to help her. Her refusal to be grateful and submissive, even in poverty, marks her as witchy. Bridget Bishop wears red, runs a tavern, and has personality. She's hanged. The common thread isn't their actual behaviour. It's their refusal to be meek, silent, and apologetic for existing. Medical knowledge is particularly dangerous for women. Midwives and healers, who possess knowledge about the body and about herbs and remedies, occupy a space that's both necessary and suspect. They're needed because doctors are rare and expensive, but they're also threatening because they have power over life and death. When a childbirth goes wrong, or a sick person dies despite treatment, it's easy to blame the midwife's witchcraft rather than accept the limitations of 17th century medicine. Several accused women in Salem and other witch hunts are midwives or known for their healing skills. Women who don't attend church regularly are automatically suspicious. Church attendance is one of the few public spaces where women appear, and missing services suggest either physical incapacity or spiritual corruption. Sarah Osborne hadn't been to church in over a year because she was bedridden with illness, but this is used as evidence against her. The logic is circular. Godly women attend church, you don't attend church, therefore you're not godly, therefore you're probably a witch. And then there's the sexuality dimension, which is deeply uncomfortable but essential to understanding the accusations. Older women, particularly those past menopause, are seen as no longer fulfilling their primary biological function of childbearing. This makes them socially useless in Puritan eyes, and socially useless women are expendable. There's also a fear and disgust toward aging female bodies. The witch stereotype includes physical descriptions that are basically just what aging looks like. Wrinkles, thinning hair, sagging skin. These natural signs of aging become evidence of supernatural evil when they appear on women. Meanwhile, younger women and girls, the accusers, wield power in ways that seem revolutionary until you look closer. Yes, their testimony matters. Yes, adults listen to them, but they're not truly empowered. They're weaponized. They're useful to the patriarchal structure as long as they're identifying threats, other women, and reinforcing the system by demonstrating what happens when you don't conform. The moment these girls stop being useful or become threatening themselves, they'd be discarded. Their power is entirely conditional and dependent on male authority validating their claims. The accusations also reveal deep intergenerational tension between women. Many of the accusers are young women and girls who are essentially accusing older women, mother figures, grandmother figures, women who represent what the girls will become if they follow the traditional path. There's something almost Oedipal about it, a subconscious rebellion against the future that awaits them, lives of silence, submission, and thankless labour. By accusing older women, they're temporarily rejecting that future, even as they're ultimately reinforcing the system that will trap them in it. Some of the accused women are targeted specifically because they represent sexual threats or transgressions. Bridget Bishop has been married 3 times, which suggests she's somehow used sexuality to trap men. Women who've had children out of wedlock or who've been involved in scandals are particularly vulnerable. Puritan society is obsessed with controlling female sexuality, and any woman whose sexual history isn't perfectly respectable is automatically suspect. The witch stereotype includes elements of deviant sexuality, attending naked Sabbaths, having intercourse with the devil, that reveal deep anxieties about female sexual agency. Women who argue with other women are targeted too. Female friendships in Puritan society are often fraught because women are in competition for limited resources and status, which comes through their relationships with men. When women fight over property lines, childcare, access to resources, or social standing, these conflicts can become accusations. She cursed me after I refused to lend her my spinning wheel, and my wool hasn't been the same since. It's women policing other women, enforcing social norms through accusation. The few men who are accused often have connections to accused women. They're husbands, like John Proctor, whose wife Elizabeth is accused first, or they're men who defend accused women and thereby make themselves suspicious. The accusation spreads through family connections, but it almost always originates with a woman. The witch hunt's primary target is female independence, female agency, and female power, even the very limited power available in Puritan society. What makes this dynamic particularly tragic is that women are turning on each other. The accusers are girls and women. Many of the witnesses who testify to suspicious behaviour are women. Women search accused women's bodies for devil's marks. Women are the ones enforcing Puritan gender norms most viciously, because they've internalised the system and because there's a grim survival strategy at work. If you accuse others, you're less likely to be accused yourself. If you demonstrate your loyalty to the system by helping identify its enemies, maybe you'll be safe. But nobody's safe. That's the lesson Rebecca Nurse's execution teaches. Even if you're the perfect Puritan woman, pious, maternal, devoted, submissive, you can still be accused and killed if someone with power wants you gone. The system doesn't actually protect women who conform. It just gives them slightly better odds. And those odds can evaporate in an instant if you have bad luck, bad timing, or the wrong enemies. The witch trials reveal the impossible position of women in Puritan society. If you're poor, you're suspicious. If you're wealthy, you're threatening. If you're silent, you're evasive. If you're outspoken, you're unnatural. If you're young, you're potentially disobedient. If you're old, you're useless and probably evil. If you're attractive, you're dangerous. If you're unattractive, you're witch-like. There's no way to be a woman that's safe. The category itself is suspect. Some historians have argued that the Salem Witch Trials were, at their core, about controlling women. In a society where women were legally and socially subordinate but still somehow threatening, because they gave birth, because they knew things about the body and about herbs, because they formed relationships and alliances, because they had their own inner lives, the witch hunt was a way of reinforcing that subordination. It was a message. This is what happens when you step out of the line. This is what happens when you own property. Speak your mind, resist male authority, or simply fail to be sufficiently grateful for your subordinate position. After the trials end, the women who survive carry trauma that goes largely unacknowledged. The accusers, the girls and young women whose testimony killed people, have to live with what they did. Most disappear from historical record, presumably marrying and living quiet lives under different names. Only Ann Putnam Jr. ever apologizes publicly, and even then she frames it as having been deceived by Satan rather than taking full responsibility. The accused women who survive imprisonment come home to find their reputations destroyed, their property often seized, their families impoverished. Some never recover physically or emotionally from their time in jail. The witch trials also demonstrate how patriarchal systems pit women against each other. The accusers and the accused are all victims of the same oppressive structure, but instead of recognizing their common enemy, they turn on each other. The girls get brief, conditional power by identifying other women as threats. The accused women lose everything, and the men who run the courts, write the laws, and enforce the executions maintain their authority throughout. It's a system that produces no winners among women, only different types of victims. What's particularly chilling is how the witch trials use women's own testimony against them. Women are encouraged to testify about other women's suspicious behaviour. How she looked at me funny, how her butter always churns better than mine, how she muttered something after I refused to help her. These testimonies, given by women, are then used to convict women. The system extracts women's voices, their observations, their conflicts, and weaponizes them. Women are made complicit in their own oppression. Today, when we look back at the Salem witch trials, we often focus on the injustice, the hysteria, the failure of the legal system, but we should also see them as a case study in how societies control women. The trials happened in a specific time and place, but the dynamics, punishing female independence, policing female behaviour, using women against each other, are patterns that repeat across history. Salem was extreme, but it wasn't unique. It was just more honest about what it was doing. The women who died in Salem, whether they were poor like Sarah Good, respectable like Rebecca Nurse, or independent like Bridget Bishop, died for failing to be the right kind of woman in a society that made being the right kind of woman impossible. And the girls who accused them learned a terrible lesson, that power gained by weaponizing your own oppression is hollow, temporary, and comes at the cost of your humanity. In the end, the Salem witch trials didn't protect women or give them voice. It silenced them permanently, one hanging at a time. So, how was your day in Salem, Massachusetts, 1692? You woke up in a world where happiness was suspicious, where your neighbours kept lists of your sins, where teenage girls could destroy your life with a word, and where the legal system was designed to confirm guilt rather than establish innocence. You survived, barely, in a community so consumed by fear and religious paranoia that it turned on itself, devouring its own members one accusation at a time. The Salem witch trials weren't an aberration or a strange anomaly of history. They were the logical conclusion of a society built on fear, rigid social control, and the belief that some people are inherently more valuable than others. When you combine religious extremism, economic anxiety, social hierarchies, gender oppression, and a legal system with no checks on its power, you get Salem. You get accusations without evidence, convictions without justice, and executions without mercy. 20 people died. 19 were hanged on Gallows Hill. 1 was pressed to death under stones. 5 more died in jail, including an infant. Hundreds were accused, imprisoned, and traumatized. Families were destroyed. The community was fractured in ways it would take generations to heal, if it ever truly did. But here's what makes the Salem witch trials truly haunting. They weren't carried out by monsters. They were carried out by ordinary people, farmers, ministers, magistrates, merchants, neighbours, who convinced themselves they were doing the right thing. They believed they were protecting their community, serving God, and fighting evil. They had laws, procedures, and respected authorities guiding them, and they were completely, catastrophically wrong. The trials ended not because people suddenly developed consciences, but because the accusations started threatening the wrong people. When the wealthy and politically connected began getting accused, when the governor's wife was named, suddenly everyone discovered that maybe spectral evidence wasn't so reliable after all. It wasn't justice that stopped the trials, it was self-preservation among the elite. In the years that followed, Salem tried to move on. Some of the accusers apologized, some of the judges expressed regret. The Massachusetts legislature eventually reversed the convictions and offered financial restitution to survivors and heirs. But no amount of apologies or money could bring back the dead or undo the trauma. Salem would forever be synonymous with injustice, hysteria, and the dangers of unchecked authority. The Salem Witch Trials teach us that fear is contagious, that power without accountability is dangerous, that systems designed to find guilt will always find it, and that everyone else is doing it has never been a moral justification for anything. They teach us to question authority, demand evidence, protect the accused, and resist the seductive comfort of mob mentality. They also teach us that it can happen anywhere, to anyone, at any time. Salem wasn't special. The Puritans weren't uniquely cruel. They were just people under pressure who made terrible choices and then justified those choices with religion, law, and the belief that they were the righteous ones. Sound familiar? So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your comfortable bed with your functioning legal system, your separation of church and state, and your reasonable expectation that your neighbours won't accuse you of flying on a broomstick, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. But also remember how thin the line is between civilization and Salem, between justice and witch hunt, between reason and mass delusion. The ghosts of Salem, Rebecca Nurse, Giles Corey, Sarah Good, and all the others, don't haunt us because they were witches. They haunt us because they were innocent, and because the same forces that killed them, fear, prejudice, the abuse of power, the weaponization of accusation, still exist today. We just call them by different names. Sleep well. And remember, in Salem, the real evil wasn't supernatural, it was human. And that's the scariest thing of all.